rally. That is what the investigation is going to be, and we don't know the circumstances.
And hopefully we get some details as that investigation goes on. Great. Congressman, yes. Before you go, I want to talk about the VP sweepstakes with you. I'm sure you've got some thoughts on that, and you can offer your opinion. Congressman, do you have a preferred candidate? What would you expect now to see in the vice president for Donald Trump?
I prefer the candidate that Donald Trump picks. I think Donald Trump is going to do an excellent job of putting together both his vice president and ultimately his cabinet, as he did last time. He's got a great focus on what needs to be done to change the direction of this country, to close the border, to address this out-of-control spending that's resulting in unbelievable inflation, and also to reinstill our stature in the international community as a result of this failed foreign policy of the Biden administration. I think he's laser-focused, and I believe he's going to pick a great team.
Congressman, hopefully we can talk again soon. Congressman Mike Turner, thanks for making time for us on a busy, busy morning for him, the chair of the House Intelligence Committee. Let's give an update on stories elsewhere this morning with your Bloomberg Brief. Here's Yahara Hakez.
Hi, John. Goldman Sachs trading unit powered a surge in earnings in the second quarter. Earnings were almost 3 times better than those posted a year ago when it was plagued by losses in real estate investments and the consumer banking unit in the middle of an industry-wide deal-making slowdown. Google parent Alphabet is in talks for its biggest acquisition ever. Sources telling Bloomberg the tech giant is aiming to buy cybersecurity startup Wiz for as much as $23 billion. The acquisition of Wiz would help Google compete with the likes of Microsoft and Amazon in an increasingly competitive cloud market. And BlackRock says the 20-year-old gunman who shot and injured former President Donald Trump over the weekend was featured briefly in an ad for the money manager. Thomas Matthew Crooks was one of several students who appeared in the background of the 2022 ad and was unpaid. BlackRock saying the footage will be made available to authorities and that the ad will be removed from circulation. That's your Bloomberg Brief. John?
Yahara, thank you. Coming up this hour on this program, we'll catch up with retired Secret Service agent Jeff James as officials face heightened scrutiny after Saturday's Trump rally. Trump's former ambassador to Switzerland, Ed McMullen, as the RNC begins, and Jim Karen of Morgan Stanley as global investors ramp up the so-called Trump trade. Up next on this program, the Secret Service under pressure.
There's no way to couch this any other way than it was a security failure. There are going to be some very hard discussions within the Secret Service and within the greater security industry, wondering why this happened.
That's next, live from New York City this morning. Good morning.
On the heartbeat of the tech
spread across global markets.
The real-time data aspect is going to be important.
We're going to bring you expert analysis on that. Sure.
Don't miss Bloomberg's interview with the
Access the financial world on demand. Hear from leading economists, policymakers, and industry experts via live and on-demand webinars, only from Bloomberg. Start exploring to see what's moving the markets. Visit Bloomberg.com/webinars.
DOJ or other authorities
could face bigger challenges next.
Was going to keep reading World Cup. This is a 3
as the economic picture
covering the intersections of Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and beyond.
Let's take a snapshot of financial markets worldwide. Equities right now positive by 0.4%. Small caps outperforming. Stateside going into the opening bell 1 hour and 13 minutes away. Talked so much about this tug of war taking place in the bond market. CPI was softer, so yields drop. That makes sense, right? And then you've got these political considerations which started after the debate, which keep pushing bond yields higher. It's happening again, reasserting itself. Will this stick? We're up 6 on the US 10-year to 4.24. Under surveillance this morning, the Secret Service under pressure.
There's no way to couch this any other way than it was a security failure. There are going to be some very hard discussions within the Secret Service and within the greater security industry, wondering why this happened, to identify the causation of this. And I would expect the Secret Service to take some pretty dramatic internal measures to make sure this never happens again.
Here's the latest. Trump allies and critics alike demanding answers from the Secret Service after Saturday's assassination attempt at its rally in Pennsylvania. The House Oversight Committee now requesting a July 22nd hearing with Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle. Retired Secret Service agent Jeff James, who worked on President George W. Bush's detail for 5 years, joins us now. Jeff, thank you for joining us, sir. I think we've all seen the same map. And we've seen a very small map, and we've all asked the same question. How on earth did someone get on that roof, such an obvious place, and get so close to the former president of the United States? Do you think we're looking at those images the right way?
Well, yes and no. We're looking at them in the right way because that is in such close proximity to where the former president was that someone should have had responsibility for that area. So ultimately, this is going to fall in the Secret Service because even though the outer perimeter of sites is usually managed by local and state law enforcement, it's up to the site agent who put all the security together for that site to give clear and direct orders to those people to say, like, hey, this is your field of responsibility. Make sure you manage it. This roof is a concern for us. If you see anybody trying to get up there, make sure you stop them. So that's one way that it's pertinent that it's a small map. The way it's not pertinent is when you look at that little snippet of map, the shooter, I'm hearing that he was anywhere from 130 to 150 yards away. Let's say 150 just for easy math. Our snipers train out to 1,000 yards. So if you would get on Google Maps and stretch out a 3,000-foot perimeter, it encompasses everything from other farms to businesses, auto dealerships. There's a lot there that they would be looking at. So the situation our snipers are in they are looking at so much land all at once and so much property all at once that it's tough to see everything at the same time. What I think may have happened, and people always have been showing me for the last 2 days, hey, it looks like the sniper is looking right at the guy, right at the shooter. Well, he might be looking in that direction, but he might be looking at something 400 yards beyond the shooter. So when people are pointing and saying, hey, the guy has a gun, the guy has a gun, he may have been looking over the shooter to what he perceived as a hiding area for a sniper that, as I said, may have been 100 yards behind him. Then once the bad guy pulls the trigger and gives away his position, the sniper engages him and puts him down. So while it is germane in the idea that it was so close to the president, you have to understand that the entire field of fire for our snipers is almost 10 times larger than that little map everyone is looking at.
Jeff, let's put some more color on that field. Let's put a series of concentric circles and have the stage at the very epicenter of those circles. Jeff, right. Are you suggesting that each perimeter of those circles, there is a different security force responsible for it? And if that's the sense of things, I just want to understand from your perspective, how do local enforcement work with Secret Service at an event like that when they're responsible for different perimeters? How much communication is there between the two? For instance, if you identify a threat, how long before you can communicate with a different enforcement area to make sure that threat can be neutralized? How does this all work?
So you said the main word, communication. Communication is key. So what we set up at whenever the president or vice president or a candidate goes somewhere, we set up a command post, but then at each individual site, we set up a security room. And in that security room is a representative from each agency that's working there. So there would have been Butler County Police, Pennsylvania State Police, Butler Township Police, Secret Service, and so on. So if someone from the state police sees something, they get on their radio and they say, hey, it looks like a guy with a rifle's on this roof. Everyone in the security room is going to hear it, and then they're going to broadcast on their respective frequencies out to all their people so that everyone can be aware of the same threat. It's not as streamlined as being able to talk directly to someone, but when you have what was up in Butler County that day, probably 100 law enforcement officers from different agencies, finding a way to put them all on the same frequency is just about impossible. And it's also, you would create a situation where there's too much talk over and maybe important transmissions are being blocked.
Jeff, all morning I've been grappling with this issue of is this resources that the Secret Service didn't have, or was it protocol? It sounds like from your perspective, this might have been a protocol mishap.
Well, we'll find out. And we'll find out if that site agent who was in charge of the venue didn't give, as I mentioned earlier, those clear, deliberate instructions to the people on the outer perimeter, then that is a protocol, a flaw in the protocol. Look, sometimes you're telling people, hey, I want you to do general observation, walk in here among the crowd. If you see anything that seems unusual, handle it. Like you see a guy, it's 90 degrees. You see a guy in a heavy coat, get with him. Make sure you're addressing that. If you see somebody trying to get on a roof, make sure you're addressing that. But if you have something specific that was addressed in the week-long advance that you did, like, hey, this roof is a big concern for us, you need to make sure that you have somebody or a couple people assigned to say, hey, this is your field of responsibility. Make sure that you need to make sure that you're clear with your instructions to them that, hey, this is your responsibility here, take care of it for us.
Jeff, the House Oversight Committee has asked for a hearing with the head of the Secret Service, with Kimberly Cheadle. What would you want to hear from her?
Well, I'd want to hear probably exactly what they're going to ask. What were the manpower requests and were they granted? What was the timeline for the agents who were arriving from out of town and being briefed? All the things that we want to make sure that people are getting places in a timely manner, to have instructions placed to them. We want to make sure that the proper number of personnel were there. And I could tell you, look, for my 22 years, I don't think I ever worked a site where I felt like, yeah, we got plenty of people here. There's always holes to plug. And you always feel like, even just for the relief of people, so people can take a half hour and get off their feet, it would always be better if you had more people. But those are going to be the big things they're going to hit her on, are the assets, sniper teams, electronic countermeasures, and then they'll hit her on personnel.
Jeff, it's wonderful to hear from you, sir. We should do this again soon. Jeff James there, retired Secret Service agent, because this investigation is going to be ongoing. Another question I've got, guys, the extraction. That iconic photo that everyone's put up on screen, that's going to be the front pages of newspapers for perhaps the rest of this week, should that have even happened? Should they have been able to get that photo? We didn't know if there was another shooter in the crowd. We didn't really know what was happening at that time. How on earth did you get such a clean photo with Secret Service around him?
Even before that moment, you can hear Donald Trump being picked up on the mic saying, let me get my shoes. Even when he's being hurried off, I mean, he's pretty much exposed there.
Frank Lund says this is the photo that voters will remember when they get inside the ballot box, when they get inside the voting booth come November 5th.
Certainly feels that way right now. Equity futures on the S&P firmer by 0.4%. The opening bell about 60 minutes away.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
"60 minutes away from the opening bell, with equity futures positive by 0.4% on the S&P. On the Nasdaq, up by 0.5. 2 weeks of gains on the S&P, and a rally is set to continue. The outperformance on the Russell, I think the small caps are up by something like 6% last week, which is just absolutely ridiculous. Up by another 0.8% this morning. Note just dropped from Citi. This is from Andrew Hunhorse. Rate cuts go from if to when to how many. Get to the bond market. The 2-year looks like this. I know we're all focused quite rightly on what happened over the weekend and what the campaign response will be, what it might mean for policy changes in the next 12 months and beyond. Need to talk about the front end of the curve as well. 445.54 on twos. Citi say rate cuts go from if to when to how many. We hear from Chairman Powell, Danny, a little bit later this afternoon.
And I'm so curious how this market reacts. You've talked about this, the push and pull of caring about politics or the economics. I think today will be really instructive in trying to figure out which this market cares about more. Powell follows both Goolsbee and Daly, saying essentially rate cuts are here. Will Powell say the same thing?
The 2-year last week down by about 15 basis points at the front end of the curve. The 2-year this morning just about unchanged. All the price action at the longer end. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Switch on the board and get to foreign exchange. Bit of a snooze for the euro against the US dollar, 109.04. But a theme we've heard through the morning so far from the likes of Peter Cheer of Academy. People starting to question, how will people start to think about dollar-denominated assets with the kind of chaos taking place, politically speaking, in this country at the moment?
And it is a real question because dollar strength has been such a dominating trade. But when you think about the weakness in the economy, that started to peter out, saying, okay, economic weakness, maybe the dollar can start to fall. And this is, again, as we get this idea, the bottom line of Trump seems like he's more likely to be president. He's someone who does not want a strong dollar. So does that policy translate to that this time? Again, it's this fog of 2025. We still do not know.
Haven't heard the name Tina for quite a while, but there is no alternative. It's something that comes up repeatedly when it comes to foreign exchange. Let's get to your top stories. Under surveillance this morning, President Biden urging unity following the attack on Donald Trump. Speaking in a rare Oval Office address, he called for an end to political violence and outlined a path forward from here. It's a word that's echoed across both parties over the last 48 hours. Unity. Unite the country, unite the party. Who's best positioned to do that?
Well, the other question is, how long will that actually last? So Biden came out and spoke 3 times over the weekend, obviously last night, an Oval Office address calling for unity, but then of course he's going to get back on the campaign trail. And you have to wonder, if they wanted to shine this light on the former president and talking about the fact that he's an existential threat to democracy, you said it earlier, Jonathan, there's this one prism, one dimension really to this campaign. When he gives his interview tonight to Lester Hall, and then when he goes to Nevada late afternoon, what is going to be the message? They have to really pivot to policies, and that's going to be challenging for this current campaign, this current administration.
Well, he's not even running TV ads right now. He suspended them, so it sort of speaks to how he's hamstrung and really campaigning at this moment. But in terms of the rhetoric, I think it's important to distinguish what Biden, what Trump are saying, and what some people are saying down ballot, the rank and file. We talked about this earlier. J.D. Vance saying that President Biden's rhetoric directly led to the actions of this weekend. Tim Scott has said inflammatory rhetoric put lives at risk. These are 2 people who are vice presidential contenders.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Vice presidential contenders, which is why people are starting to think, does this weekend change how Trump thinks about his VP pick? What did Ambassador Bolton say? That VP pick is so important because Trump is going to rely on that person. Ed Mills says Pence was #1 when it came to policy.
I think the VP pick is important from a market perspective as well. You know, this morning and mornings like this are always about perception. If it's J.D. Vance, I think it gets really, really difficult, hard to understand just how pro-business this administration might be. J.D. Vance on certain business issues, and I'm thinking more about mergers and acquisitions and the type, has a lot in common with the likes of Elizabeth Warren. You know, the party of the Paul Ryans, Kevin McCarthy's, there aren't many of them left in Congress anymore. And if you're going to put J.D. Vance on the top of the ticket alongside you, then I start to question how pro-business this administration might be.
Well, it was J.D. Vance who said the only person effective really in the Biden administration was Lina Khan, the individual that is going after all the M&A that the Biden administration has talked about. They wanted to really try to come down heavy on big business. But when you have Lina Khan basically lining up alongside J.D. Vance, that doesn't give a picture of the normal establishment we would think of for the Republican Party.
Okay, but just to complicate everything is the Supreme Court. Regardless if he chooses as VP, it is clear that this is a Supreme Court who has made rulings of deregulation. So maybe there's an element of it doesn't matter. And again, this goes to how just complicated this is to trade at this moment.
It's such a good point. So let's talk about the trading, Danny, and we'll start with the equity market. I went through equity futures and I showed small caps outperforming. That's a continuation of what we saw last week as well. Then I got to the bond market and showed the yield curve a bit steeper, led by a move at the long end, 10-year yields higher, 30-year yields higher. And you said straight away this morning, Danny, and I think you're right, draw a line between what's happening in equities and bonds at the moment. Put equities to one side. That looks like a continuation of last week. It's this move in the bond market, that 7 basis point move higher at the long end of the curve, that might speak to the weekend's events.
But I am really interested to see how equities continue to react, because it does feel like a continuation. But we know stock-bond correlation has turned negative in a way that it usually isn't. But it's not trading that way this time. At the moment, it's trading yields higher and stocks higher. Does it rear its head again if inflation is still a concern, if we're not going to get a robust cutting cycle? Because could you get a Trump 2.0 trade that's bad for bonds and bad for equities?
Haven't been able to say this too many times so far this year. Haven't been able to say it since the start of this year. The 30-year yield above the 2-year. We're at 447 on a 30-year, 446 on 2s. The Republican National Convention kicking off in Milwaukee today, just 2 days after the assassination attempt against former President Donald Trump. Trump is set to speak on Thursday and is expected to announce his pick for vice president before then. Joining us now on the program is Ed McMullen, the former U.S. ambassador to Switzerland, who helped plan the 2016 Republican National Convention. Ambassador, fantastic to share this program with you, sir. Help me understand your reaction to Saturday evening, and help us also understand how you think it should influence how we approach the convention this week.
Well, thank you for having me. And I have to tell you, I've spoken over the weekend with people I haven't heard from in years. Foreign leaders, people that I've worked with for many, many years, friends and people all over the country. And I think the one thing that is just absolutely shocking, but no surprise, truly, is that after 10 years of vilifying and making President Trump a dehumanized creature, that is absolutely untenable in the public forum of policy and having discussions of policy. This has been the result of 7 to 10 years of incessant hammering of the president and creating a person that we don't even know. The people who know the president know him to be a very dedicated public servant, a patriot, someone who loves his country, a businessman, a father, a family man, someone who is dedicated to the future of making America great again. And to demonize the president, to call him Hitler, to do the things that were done over the past 10 years, to try to put him in prison. These are politicizing the process in a way that Americans don't even understand where they're living anymore sometimes. This has gotten to a point where there needs to be a correction. And it's very refreshing to see the President Biden calling for that correction. But the reality lies in the results. And I think we're going to see the results over the coming weeks. They have to shift now to policy. They have to talk about immigration. They have to talk about taxes. They have to talk about fuel costs. They have to talk about what they've truly been doing for 4 years in foreign policy. And they cannot survive the comparisons between 4 years of Donald Trump and the 4 years of chaos they've created.
We heard from President Trump last night, Ambassador, and he said the speech I was going to give on Thursday was going to be a humdinger. Had this not happened, this would have been one of the most incredible speeches. He says, honestly, it's going to be a whole different speech now. Do you have any insight of what he is planning to say this week at the RNC and how it's shifted?
I think the president has made very clear that this is a wake-up call for America, that going down the track of putting President Trump on the front of the new republic, looking as if he's Hitler, calling him an existential threat to the American people and our democracy. These are the things that are untenable and can't continue. And I think the president will address these issues head on. And I think we will hear about the things the president knows to be true in the United States. Americans are looking for leadership. They're looking for a return to sanity, peace, freedom, liberty around the world. And I hope and pray that the American people will see that President Trump is dedicated to making this happen, moving the country forward in this way. And I know most have, because the results in the polling shows very clearly that the American people are responding to the president's message. That's why we're seeing desperation on the side of the Democrats. Hopefully they will come around. Hopefully President Biden's promise for a change in rhetoric, a lowering of the temperature in the public domain and policy debates will happen. But the proof will be in the pudding.
Well, also, the former president seems to be talking about unity and lowering the temperature as well. That brings me to his VP pick. Who would be the right choice to lower the temperature?
You know, the people that the president has already spoken about publicly, all are phenomenal candidates for the president. As far as I'm concerned, the best candidate is the one that President Trump is most comfortable with, working 4 years to continue making America great again, to continuing the agenda that works together as a team to move the country forward. We have a lot of work to do. The president's laid that out very well. And the people that he has in the final 3 or 4 been talking about have been very well capable of standing with him to achieve those goals. And we're really looking forward to seeing who he's chosen, because I think anyone who tells you they know who he's chosen is lying to you. The president keeps this decision very close to the vest. He makes this decision and no one else.
The other thing that got louder over this weekend, along with the calls of unity, are those willing to publicly support Trump. Elon Musk, Bill Ackman, 2 conservative billionaires coming out saying that they are throwing their weight behind former President Trump. What have you heard? Is this going to whip up people who've stayed on the sidelines or been quiet, not just to open up with their support, but open up their wallets?
So I do a lot of fundraising for the president. I've been raising money for him since 2014 when he first decided to run. I've never seen a time where in the last 2 or 3 months since the New York decision and now with this assassination attempt, where people have been calling and wanting to figure out how they can write checks. I've never seen anything like this. We heard that after the NATO conference in Washington, D.C. last week, that foreign leaders were praying that there'd be a continuation of the same. I heard very different things from the foreign leaders calling me over the weekend. Presidents of countries, their secretaries of state, who know that this chaos cannot continue and that President Trump has and shown the world that freedom, liberty, and peace is the result of Trump's making America great again policies. They want that. They want that back.
Ambassador, how concerned is the international community you've cultivated with where we are as a country? The fact that we were even able to, we're talking Monday morning about an assassination attempt on a former president from over the weekend. How concerned are those individuals you're talking to about the state of affairs and how toxic American politics has become?
Well, surprisingly, toxicity in politics is not American, uniquely American. It's going on all over the world. And it has changed. The world is changing. I think the media has changed. The constant discussions on television has changed the way politics run and function. And I think foreign leaders are very concerned about the freedom and liberty and peace of the world. And they know that as goes America, so goes Europe, so goes the rest of the world, economically, foreign policy, security-wise. These are serious issues that I think this administration has got to seriously step back, analyze how they're going to move forward, and start talking about the issues. This campaign needs to be about immigration policy, tax policy, economic policy. I hear people saying that America is doing just great economically. Folks, I live in South Carolina. I can take you 50 miles from my home and show you families that cannot put food on the table. Uber drivers traveling until 4 in the morning to be able to put food on their table and work the job during the day. The economy is not good in real America. The economy is great on Wall Street. The economy is great in Washington, D.C. It's not good in real America. President Trump understands this. President Trump is the only candidate talking about it honestly and realistically with a solution and a plan. And we know in the 4 years he was president, he was successful in achieving peace, freedom, liberty, and a strong economy.
Ambassador, as you know, you need the right team around you. I think there's a caricature of the individuals that surround the president, Donald Trump. I'd like to talk about some of the facts with you. Fact of the matter is, in Trump Volume 1, he was able to attract some very, very good, smart individuals. O'Brien, I'm thinking of Lighthizer, I'm thinking of Tillerson at the beginning, Gary Cohn, the list can go on and on and on. There are some questions, though, Ambassador, about whether he can do the same again, attract that talent for Volume 2. What gives you the impression he can?
Let me dispel that myth right now. I have been, I just returned from a trip to Israel with former National Security Advisor O'Brien, and I can tell you he is as engaged and willing to serve as ever. He was one of our great foreign policy leaders. Economic policy advisors like Scott Bessent, one of the top economic advisors on Wall Street. We've got some of the top talent. I know Mr. Lighthizer, the whole team, Mr. Kudlow, all of them continue to advise and be a part of the president's team. I don't see any dearth of opportunity to get great talent. In fact, I think increasingly more quality talent is serving the role of being an advisor to the president, giving him advice and insight. And this is a great thing to see because there's no reluctance on behalf of quality people to serve. In fact, I think most are patriotic Americans who know now is the time to serve because the country's calling them and they will reach that call and deliver on that call.
Just to clarify, sir, McMullen was on my list as well. Ed McMullen, the former U.S. ambassador to Switzerland. Ambassador, thank you. Thanks for your perspective this morning. Let's give you an update on stories elsewhere. Here's your Bloomberg Brief with Yahara Hackers.
Hi, John. Shares of retailer Macy's plunging in the pre-market. The company announcing the board has unanimously determined to end discussions with Arkhouse and Brigade. In a statement, Macy's says the talks failed to lead to an actionable proposal with certainty of financing at a compelling value. This ends about 7 months of talks for Arkhouse and Brigade to acquire Macy's. Goldman Sachs, which just reported earnings, is appealing its results in the Federal Reserve's latest stress test, which would require the bank to hold more capital. That report, according to the Financial Times. CEO David Solomon had said the results did not reflect Goldman's efforts to make its business more stable. Bank executives have argued they already have enough capital, and the new rules would hurt consumers and businesses. The Fed has previously allowed banks to appeal stress test results, though it has rebuffed all challenges. And the city of Milwaukee is bracing for as many as 50,000 people to attend the Republican National Convention, and security efforts have been taken to new heights after the assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. Key venues in the city's downtown, like the Fiserv Forum, Panther Arena, and the Baird Center, are the focal points of an extensive security coordination. The U.S. Secret Service is working alongside various law enforcement personnel from across Wisconsin and Chicago to ensure safety for those attending. That's your Bloomberg Brief. John?
Yahara, thanks for this morning. Up next on the programme, we'll bring you the week ahead. We'll count you down to the opening bell, about 43 minutes away, and we'll get the view of Thanos Vamvakidis of Bank of America, Global Research, and Jim Karen of Morgan Stanley. That's on the other side. This is Bloomberg.
I've seen firsthand how some fashion businesses make women feel. And I think there's one thing, you know, being really vocal and being an Instagram activist and talking about something, there's a difference than putting your money where your mouth is and really trying to do something about the problem. And that's what I did with that business. It was about how do I take everything that I know and I've learned and actually do the opposite. And I think that as a young black female entrepreneur, the only thing that I could do was what I know from my experience. And the honest truth is, I didn't set out to create a company that was like deeply rooted in the principles of inclusivity and diversity. I set out to make a company that was right for me and my friends, and I knew that if I had a problem, chances are somebody else does. And I think that's where so many businesses are, you know, created, when you're solving a problem that's real for you and therefore real for the consumer.
It's the world's second largest economy with a growing influence in global affairs. But geopolitical uncertainties, deflationary pressures, and questions about foreign investment linger. Bloomberg, The China Show, brings you the unmatched expertise you need to keep track of breaking news, in-depth market analysis, and the most influential newsmakers in and around China. Bloomberg, The China Show. Weekdays around the world, right here on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
The open about 40 minutes away. Equity futures positive here by 0.33% on the S&P. It's quite a week ahead we've got for you. This is what it looks like today. We'll hear from Fed Chair Jay Powell. The RNC officially kicking off a little bit later as well. And NBC airing its interview with President Biden at 9 p.m. Eastern Time. Tuesday, we'll get retail sales. Wednesday, the Fed's Beige Book. Thursday, another round of jobless claims. Plus, we'll hear from Donald Trump at the RNC. Joining us now to discuss this market is Jim Karen of Morgan Stanley alongside Thanos Vanvakidis of Bank of America Global Research. Gentlemen, thank you for being with us. I want to start in the bond market and talk about what's been developing throughout this morning, and some people might say over the last few weeks. The curve is steeper. This morning it's led by the long end. It's the so-called bear steepener. 10s are up by 4 or 5 basis points, the 30 years up by 6. Jim Karen, can you say that this is the Trump trade this morning?
Thank you for having me on your show. I think that we can say that this is a reflection of some of the concerns that the markets have in terms of, potentially if President Trump gets reelected into office, that, that clearly that tariffs and maybe some tax and fiscal policies could be somewhat inflationary. And I think that the yield curve is reflecting that. But I think it's also important to recognize, though, too, that inflation did come down last week. We got some friendly data there. The Fed is expected to cut rates at some point this year, whether it's September or December, clearly is a debate. So I think that plays into it as well. And remember that as the Fed cuts interest rates in this environment, which I do think we have an inflation backdrop, it is likely to stoke some inflation concerns going forward. So I would attribute some of this to potentially a Trump trade, and I would also associate some of this with a with a new baseline view that we do have a higher inflation framework behind us.
Thanos, I have the same question for you, but about this equity market. We can put the bond market aside for one moment about those bear steepeners, but when you look at an S&P future session that's up by 1/3, small caps up by a seventh of 1%, how much of that is a continuation of last week or something about this weekend?
To a large extent, it has to do with this amazing combination of macro U.S. data, where you have inflation moving in the right direction, but the economy remains resilient, particularly the labor market. And in addition, you have a Fed policy reaction function in which they're eager to cut, even though inflation is still above the target, just to make sure that they avoid a harder landing. At the same time, fiscal policy is loose, and no matter who is elected after the election is likely to remain loose. So it's a perfect combination of these positive ideal developments that are causing actually risk assets, not only equities, across the board to rally.
And the dollars may be hard to figure out in this environment, Thanos, which is why I know you used to concentrate on FX, but I started with small caps to ask about this economic environment. Do you have a more clear picture in how the dollar unfolds, how that trade unfolds in 2025 with the fog of not just the economy, but of politics?
Now, we are bearish on the dollar, and this is an out of consensus call. We believe that Fed rate cuts matter much more than cuts by other central banks because they have global implications. And if we are in an environment in which the Fed is cutting during a soft landing and the U.S. is recoupling with the rest of the world, this will also contribute to some dollar weakness. and the dollar is overvalued. In real effective terms, is actually at a historically very high level. Now, on the elections, I would argue that the impact on the dollar is mixed. A lot depends on the policies, and you can think of some policies like tariffs, tax cuts that will support the dollar, but you can think of some others, such as President Trump, the fact that he doesn't want a strong dollar, the fact that he may make some comments against the Fed, which will weaken the dollar. See, it depends which of the two will dominate after the elections.
Jim Karen, is that how you look at the foreign exchange market?
Yeah, look, I mean, clearly there's an interest rate differential component to this where, and I do agree that when the Fed starts to move, that's going to have more influence on the dollar. But I also think that there's another element that's influencing the dollar beyond just interest rate differentials, and that's really the movements in the equity markets, right? So one of the things that, from a global investor perspective, that's been a really strong market has been U.S. equities. So to the extent that U.S. asset prices continue to improve or have the potential or the ability to continue to improve, then that's going to attract foreign capital into U.S. assets, and that's also going to be a strong point for the dollar. So I can't say that I have a strong currency view one way or the other. I think the dollar is roughly going to stay plus or minus within a range around these levels. I don't have necessarily a view that it rallies a lot stronger or necessarily it falls, but I do have a view that U.S. assets are probably likely still going to be attractive to the global community, and that probably keeps some strength in the dollar that might not ordinarily otherwise be there from an economic and fiscal and fundamental perspective.
That is going to be an ongoing debate. Gents, thanks for being with us this morning. Jim Karen of Morgan Stanley, Themos Vanvakidis of Bank of America Global Research. I think we've got time for some final thoughts. Big week.
Absolutely. For me, it's going to be who the former President Donald Trump picks as his vice president. That's going to say a lot about what kind of campaign we can see. And then also, what does Joe Biden, the sitting president, say tonight? It's supposed to be about age. Now it's going to be about unity.
For me, it is that. It's unity. Because again, historically, and people dealt with this that are in politics now, these moments of shocks acted as a force of moderation. Because you have a populace who says, stop this, I don't want to see more of that. Is it that moment now? Are we there yet?
24 hours away from this lineup right here. Andrew Sheets of Morgan Stanley, Jennifer Flynn of Invesco, Chris Marinak of Jenny Montgomery Scott, and Dan Greenhouse of Solis. A lot to explore with them over the next 24 hours. The team picks it up next at 9 a.m. Eastern Time with Matt Miller, Shanali Basak, and Kelly Greifeld. From New York City, this was Bloomberg Surveillance.
Welcome to the world of decentralized finance.
With a surge in Bitcoin, you have crypto stocks also surging.
Bloomberg's covering all things crypto, the people.
This is a political attack, and we must hold our elected officials accountable.
The transactions.
Really a record-breaking moment.
Bitcoin is the exit strategy.
And the technology.
Awareness is going to grow, and these things grow the overall industry.
Crypto as an asset class is here to stay.
Bloomberg Crypto, only on Bloomberg.
One of my greatest advantages, I own my company 100%. No board of directors. I make a decision, we move. And I had a guy say to me, runs a big media company. This guy ran a major division, Warner Discovery. Okay. It was just Warner Media at that time. He says, you know what, when we sit in our meetings, we don't talk about Disney. We don't talk about Paramount. We don't talk about Sony. He goes, you know who we talk about? I go, who? You. I said, really? He goes, yeah, you. I go, why? He goes, we are giant battleships, and you're like a little speedboat. And if there's gold on the beach, you run rings around us, get to the beach, take the gold, and by the time we turn our battleship around, you've already taken the gold. I go, that's right. I'm always gonna be that entrepreneur. I started my company from my dining room table 30 years ago. 30 years ago. And I started by calling every television station, asking them to carry my once-a-week show. On average, they all said no 50 times, and I worked through about 50,000 no's to get 150 yeses. That guy that was at that dining room table trying to pay his phone bill is that same guy today, 30 years later. That fire is still in my belly. I still run scared, and I'm still running after that vision of building the world's biggest media company.
Today's CFOs are reshaping the C-suite. Bloomberg's chief future officer shines a spotlight on these dynamic leaders.
It's an incredibly fun job, for sure.
We're in the business of leading beyond the numbers.
To me, teamwork is key. You need to identify opportunities and push people.
It's not about how to say no, it's about how to say yes.
Their impact goes far beyond the balance sheet. And on Chief Future Officer, they focus on much more than just revenues and margins.
Today's CFO has to be much, much more than a bookkeeper. I talk more about culture today than I talk about numbers.
It's not just about debits and credits and digits and dollar signs.
It's a lot more than the profit today. It's building the future of tomorrow.
Get passion, perspective, and more from the Chief Future Officers of some of the world's most influential companies. New episodes this summer, only on Bloomberg. Brought to you by Workday.
All right, we are looking at markets that are really running higher. 30 minutes until the start of trading. I'm Matt Miller.
I'm Sonali Basak.
And I'm Katie Greifeld. Bloomberg Open Interest starts right now.
All eyes on Donald Trump. The presidential candidate is defiant after an assassination attempt sends shockwaves around the globe.
The Trump trade gaining more momentum as investors boost bets that Donald Trump wins in November.
And more bank earnings roll in. Goldman's profit soars as trading tops estimates. Let's take a look at where these markets are trading right now. At the start of the trading week, you can see we've got a rally on our hands. The S&P 500 up about 0.4% in pre-market trading. A similar story if you take a look at the NASDAQ 100 with big tech powering along. As you see, the bond market actually sell off a little bit. Yields currently higher by about 5 basis points on the 10-year yield, Matt.
All right, taking a look at the inversion here, you can see that we're getting a little bit of a disinversion. This is the 2s, 10s, but you see it more less subtly, I should say, in the 2s, 30s, where we actually had a positive steep trade. Here are the odds that Donald Trump wins in blue, and the odds that Biden wins in yellow. You can see that Trump has really gained an advantage over the past few days.
And also keeping an eye before the market opens on Goldman shares, Matt, because the stock is up about 0.6% pre-market after the bank's second quarter results beat analyst estimates. Trading surged, but investment banking advisory fees in particular were just a little shy of estimates.
All right, just want to quickly point out before we get into this today that what happened this weekend was horrific. It was historic as well. An assassination attempt like this is something that many of us will not have seen in our lifetimes. One man was killed, 2 others are in critical condition. Corey Comparatori is a firefighter who attended the rally. He died protecting his wife and 2 daughters, reportedly shot in the head as he dove to protect his family. So I don't want to lose sight of that as we discuss the implications politically, economically, and financially.
And for better or worse, that's what you're seeing in the markets this morning. Of course, the consensus being that this really solidifies Trump's chances at recapturing the presidential office. That's what you're seeing in the bond market, and that's what you're seeing in the stock market as well, Sonali.
We certainly are, and across currency markets as well. But let's also talk about the political backdrop for a moment here, because this is all coming as the Republican National Convention kicks off today. Of course, Trump expected to address the audience a little later this week. We will keep an eye on all of that for you throughout the course of the next 2 hours. And we're going to talk more about this because in a rare Oval Office address, President Biden calling for unity ahead of the Republican National Convention.
While we may disagree, we are not enemies. We're neighbors. We're friends, co-workers, citizens, and most importantly, we're fellow Americans. We must stand together. The power to change America should always rest in the hands of the people, not in the hands of would-be assassins.
We're going to now head to Milwaukee, the site of this week's convention, where we can find Bloomberg Balance of Power co-host Joe Matthew and set the stage for us here on what to expect this week.
Well, as far as this week goes, a lot of questions actually about the direction this entire convention is going to take, Shonali, after the events of this weekend. Donald Trump told in an interview just yesterday, the Washington Examiner, that he has rewritten his speech for Thursday night. He said it was going to be a real humdinger, and that's a quote. But he's rewritten the speech to embrace unity, and that's what we've actually been hearing from lawmakers here in our special broadcast last evening. Everyone from Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin to Congressman Brian Stile of Wisconsin were calling for the temperature to be brought down. Now, we are expecting some news today on a running mate, which is going to be another layer here to this whole conversation. And there will be some business had today. Delegates are in town, not just to applaud politicians and get together and have steaks and drinks at night, but they're actually going to have roll call votes on the party platform. That's the first time since 2016 that will be happening, as well as entering names in a nomination, and that's why we expect some news on a running mate later on.
Joe, what's the feeling on the ground in Milwaukee? I mean, has security increased? Is there tension in the air?
Security is intense. I've had an opportunity to be at almost a dozen of these things, and it's never been heavier than what we have here. It's not even so much an expanding of a perimeter map, but a hardening of a perimeter. The gates are up. You've got law enforcement from 40 different agencies. We talked to police from all over the state of Wisconsin yesterday and bumped into some from Cleveland. They're here from Chicago, and you've got federal law enforcement everywhere as well. That will ramp up today as the actual events get underway here in the hall with 50,000 people to protect. It's a pretty serious job. You can't drive through downtown Milwaukee right now. Streets are closed. You've got helicopters in the air and airport-style security to get into the building.
All right, Joe Matthew, really appreciate that update and looking forward to your coverage all week long. Of course, more of that coming later today. But let's keep this conversation going now on the fallout. We're joined now by Henrietta Treyz. She is Veta Partners Managing Partner and Director of Economic Policy. And we just heard from Joe Matthew this attempt to bring the temperature down when it comes to the political discourse in this country. And it feels like you are seeing a rare moment of unity right now, Henrietta. But how long does that last?
Right. That is definitely what we're seeing. It's a welcome respite for anybody who's followed politics for the last decade. I imagine it will not hold for very long. I do think that it is a good sign that Nikki Haley will be attending the RNC. She was, of course, not scheduled to be there before, but now is going to show up, which is boosting some speculation about whether or not she might be the vice presidential pick. I think it's worth noting for the investment community that the way for Trump to have outsized wins in this election cycle, for a true wave and not just the statistical one that is geographically coming the Republicans' way based off of what we see in the races for the U.S. Senate, you could see a situation where if a Nikki Haley or a centrist presidential candidate or somebody who sort of tries to reach out to the middle, tries to reach out to a suburban, female, educated, married voter, that's where Trump's lag really is in the electorate. If he's able to overcome that with a unity narrative, and he does come at it with a deficit against President Biden, who pulls 7 points ahead on, protecting democracy, things along those lines. A big part of that is what drove Nikki Haley's primary gains in Indiana just a few weeks back, getting 22% of the vote. So I think a continuation of this unity theme would advance the ability of former President Trump to come in with a pretty sizable majority in the House and Senate next year.
Henrietta, how important is a unity candidate for vice president, and what do some of the other potential picks say about the path forward and what it means for the country and for investors?
Well, I think it could be material. We have a $4.6 trillion tax bill that needs to be written next year. If Republicans are able to come in with, instead of 51 or 52 seats in the U.S. Senate, something like 55, 57 seats in the U.S. Senate, that is the difference between, $2 trillion in deficit reduction increases or $2.7 trillion in deficit increases. It's the difference between seeing the SALT deduction capped at $10,000 again for a $1.2 trillion revenue raiser, or if, we don't have the votes for that and you can't get it through the House. So it is a really big impact, and we're sort of sifting through that now with investors today to really understand what the tax bill would look like next year, because it's a big difference if you have 51 senators from the Republican Party versus 55. You got a lot of votes you can work around if that's the case and you have a larger majority. It would behoove the former president to come in with as many Republican senators as humanly possible.
And I mean, that's all part of the Trump trade that we're going to be talking about all day today. It is all about, you know, more tax cuts, increased tariffs, even higher than the Biden administration has increased them, and decreased regulation, even more than we've seen, you know, the Supreme Court already achieve in that sense. How strong do you think all three of those legs are?
Well, I think the tax piece has to come first because you must have congressional support for that bill. The president has no authority to write tax law. So that has to go through the House and Senate. As we've seen for the last several years, the House Republican Conference, when it's this small, this razor thin, it is dysfunctional. Every couple of months we work with, is Speaker Johnson going to get fired or not? If the Republicans have, you know, 235 seats in the House of Representatives, all of a sudden the Freedom Caucus is no longer the relevant factor and you can negotiate from the middle. If you are looking at tariffs, then what you'll be able to do with more Republicans in the U.S. Senate is maybe work around some of the objections from farm state senators, Chuck Grassley and the like. Tariffs, as you point out, would absolutely be, I think, an issue that Trump would not even have to run into. I don't think he will run into it anyway. 83% of Americans think China is our #1 threat, and they're happy to see the tariffs go on, even when you explain that tariffs are taxes. It has very broad support challenging them as our #1 competitor.
Henrietta, we only have a little bit of time left, but I do want to talk about President Biden. You wrote on July 11th that you're maintaining your 70%, your high 70% odds that Biden will not be on the ballot in November. Has that changed?
It has not changed. I see Kamala Harris as the next replacement. I go a step further than that. I think what we're seeing from Nikki Haley and from all the other Democrats in the wings is that they're trying to keep their powder dry for 2028. The waters of 2024 are just way too murky for any next stage Democratic or Republican candidate to wade into right now. And the polling data, while it continues to show Trump and Biden just 1 or 2 points away from each other, which is shocking, 71% of the electorate is not swayed by the debates. We'll see if they were swayed by the assassination attempt. But Biden needs to get off the ticket if Democrats are going to have a chance to turn out voters with the same level of galvanization that Republicans are currently experiencing.
Henrietta Treyz of Beta Partners, we thank you so very much for joining us this morning. And remember, Bloomberg Television and Radio will have special coverage on the ground in Milwaukee for the Republican National Convention. Watch it all week, starting at noon Eastern. Keeping an eye on one set of stocks moving higher in the pre-market. We said we would keep an eye on markets for you because a lot is moving under the ground. It's private prison operators and firearm-related companies surging. Pre-market here, more than 7% each on Geo Group and CoreCivic. Of course, Smith & Wesson as well as Sturm Ruger also moving higher pre-market. For a wider look at the market, though, we are now joined by Victoria Fernandez, Chief Market Strategist at Crossmark Global Investments. And you think about the trade that investors are waking up to this morning, dollar higher, curve steepening, and stocks on a tear, particularly certain sectors. How are you thinking about the geopolitical landscape as it pertains to the market now?
Well, we've definitely seen a shift over the weekend after the events that happened, but I do think we need to take a step back. There's a long time between now and the election, and things can change pretty quickly. So I don't think I would completely change my portfolio based on what we saw over the weekend or the changes that we've seen this morning in the futures market. But it does make you look and say, wait a minute. If we are pricing in a Trump victory, we will have that steepening of the yield curve. We saw it this morning. Back in 2016, we saw that after he won election. We saw financials do better. We saw industrials do better. And so I think those are sectors you can start looking at where you've had pullbacks in the market. Then maybe you go ahead and start adding some of those names into your portfolio and really build out your diversification. But look, we've all been concerned about the breadth of the market as of late. And Friday, we had really strong breadth come in. I mean, we had almost 50% of the constituents in the S&P 500 make 20-day highs. So It looks like the market is doing pretty well right now.
Well, Victoria, a lot of that, the S&P 493 coming back is based on an assumption that the Fed has to cut rates going forward at least once or twice this year. And I note that Jan Hatzius a couple of weeks ago from Goldman Sachs said, if we do get a Trump presidency, the Fed is going to need to raise rates 5 times. 130 basis points was his argument because increased tariffs bring more inflation. What do you think about that concern?
I can see the reasoning on that. I mean, we've seen it already this morning. We saw the long end of the curve move up. 10s move up a few basis points. 30s move up even longer than that because of the inflation component. That's what the long end of the curve reacts to. So that could be a component that we're there. But if you combine that with the belief that you're going to have growth and strong growth, then I think the market will overlook higher rates a little bit at this point in time, and will still lean more towards those risk-on sectors that are doing really well right now. And like you said, that breadth is really increasing. We have to watch and see if the momentum continues. Momentum is belief in a soft landing, Fed cutting rates for right now, and the AI secular trade. Those tailwinds are going to continue for the foreseeable future.
I want to talk about timing here, because on the topic of the curve steepener and some of these other Trump trades that have been talked about, you think about what we saw a couple weeks ago coming out of the debate. Of course, the reaction in the market was strong the next day as people coalesced, at least investors, around the idea that Trump would win the presidency. And then those trades fizzled by the time that the week was through. You think about this current episode that we're in, how sustainable is this? I mean, what does the path between now and November look like when it comes to timing some of these Trump trades?
I wish I had an answer for you on that question. I don't know what the timing is going to be on these, and we don't know if this bounce that we're seeing will fade. Probably a lot of it will have to do with what we see coming out of the convention this week, the rhetoric that we see out of there. You guys were talking to a guest previously. If Trump and his campaign can really pull in some of those moderate voters, then I think you'll continue to see some movement here in the market in support of what we would call the Trump trade. If they don't manage to do that, then we could see this reverse pretty quickly. So we never want to time the market, but we want to look at some of those sectors that have high quality names, strong balance sheets, good cash flows. That's where people need to focus right now.
All right, great to get grounded with you, Victoria. Thank you so much for joining us on this day. Victoria Fernandez there of Crossmark Global Investments. Coming up, we're going to take a closer look at the results coming in from Goldman Sachs with Gerard Cassidy, RBC Capital Markets head of U.S. Bank Equity Strategy and large cap banks as well. This is Bloomberg.
The names that move markets are on Bloomberg.
You know, with all due respect and thoughts and empathy and sympathy for the people who are suffering at the moment, and there are plenty. It's not just Ukraine and Gaza, it's in many other corners of the world as well. But I'm constantly surprised by the level of resilience and the capacity to actually bounce back from those traumas. So I have faith in the human beings and their capacity to respond to adversity. We've seen it. You know, look, earlier in the pandemics, we thought that the world was coming to an end, right? It hasn't. Nobody thought that vaccines would come up in such a short period of time. And every time we have to constantly resurrect this spirit of resilience.
But are you hopeful that
I'm always hopeful. Oh, come on, we have to be. We have to be.
Bloomberg. Context changes everything. Bloomberg Surveillance covers the latest in global markets and the political events that influence your world. Join Jonathan Farrell, Lisa Abramowitz, and Anne-Marie Hordern only on Bloomberg. Context changes everything.
Now to high interest, a look at what's making headlines around the world. The Secret Service is facing harsh public scrutiny and investigations after the assassination attempt of former President Donald Trump. Since Saturday's shooting at a campaign rally in Butler, Pennsylvania, Trump allies have blasted the agency over its protection of the former president. Security concerns are particularly acute as thousands descend on Milwaukee for the start of the Republican National Convention. BlackRock says the 20-year-old gunman who shot and injured Trump over the weekend was featured briefly in an ad for the money manager. Thomas Matthew Crooks was one of several students who appeared in the background of the 2022 ad and was an unpaid participant. BlackRock says the footage will be made available to authorities and that the ad will be removed from circulation. And it was a mixed bag of earnings for Goldman Sachs. Advisory fees came in below estimates in the second quarter, offsetting a surge in profit as fixed income and equity trading helped drive better than expected results.
And joining us now for more on Goldman Sachs is Gerard Cassidy. He's RBC Capital Markets head of U.S. Bank Equity Strategy and large cap bank analyst. And you look at this morning's results and you realize perhaps volatility is still very good for Goldman Sachs. How much room does Goldman, Morgan Stanley, the investment banking industry really have to run, Gerard?
Thank you for having me on the program. And I would say that it's really going to be dictated by what happens in the second half of the year in capital markets. And if we have increased volatility, as you just pointed out, Shanali, that's better for trading. FICC and equity trading do better in volatile markets than they do in stable markets. So if the markets start to pick up in volatility, I think you're going to see both Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs, as well as JP Morgan, Bank of America, Merrill, and Citigroup all have better trading results in the second half of the year. But if there's limited volatility, then of course trading results will slow down. And we have to remember, seasonally, the third quarter, calendar third quarter, is always the weakest quarter for trading because of the summer vacation months.
What did you make of this fun fact here in Goldman's results, this idea that they were willing to send compensation costs a little higher here? Are you comfortable with that, given the uncertainty that's in the market for the rest of the year?
You need to see in the capital markets business, particularly in investment banking, compensation is extremely important to keep your best, biggest producers. And so when you take a look at their investment banking results, which were strong on a year-over-year basis, you need to make sure you set aside the bonuses that you're going to be paying at the end of the year. And that's what they obviously did with their higher compensation costs this quarter. So it wasn't money is put aside for not producing. The numbers were there for the production. So they want to make sure they take care of their people at the end of the year, especially the people that are producing the revenues.
I want to talk a little bit more specifically about investment banking and specifically the merger advisory fees. For Goldman, that came in at $688 million. That's about $100 million behind what we saw JP Morgan put up. What do you make of that gap? Is that something that Goldman can conceivably close sometime soon?
It is a number that was lower, as you pointed out, than JP Morgan, but we have to remember when it comes to advisory, what happens is these deals are episodic, and then when they close also is hard to predict. And when you look at the JP Morgan numbers in particular, and you look at the guidance they gave in investment banking in mid-June, they far exceeded that guidance, and it was due to some deals that closed at the end of the quarter, which apparently they were not expecting in the middle of June. So they had very strong numbers. But again, Goldman Sachs is a premier investment advisor for M&A. They have not lost their top shelf ranking, and they will continue to be the premier advisor. And again, it's really the timing of the revenues. It's hard to predict exactly when they fall into the quarter, but looking at it from a calendar year basis, we expect to Goldman that, assuming M&A remains robust or picks up, Goldman will be right there winning its fair share.
They tapped John Mahoney to run their firm-wide strategy. He's a banker who's been with Goldman Sachs since 1987. I mean, that's when Paul Sweeney started in banking. What does it mean that they didn't tap some young, rising superstar and instead chose such an experienced hand?
I think experience brings a lot to the table, and that's what certainly Goldman Sachs wants at this point. As you know, they went into the consumer banking businesses over the last 5 years, let's call it, and they've discovered that it was too much of a challenge for them to be competitive, and they're exiting those businesses. So now as they realign their strategic going forward messages, I think what you're going to see is they're going to be very focused on what they do best, which is investment banking, trading, wealth management, and asset management. And as they excel in that, yes, it may be a little more volatile, but under Solomon's leadership, the CEO, they have grown their tangible book value per share and book value per share very effectively under his leadership by returning excess capital. And that's part of the strategy over the long term. And you saw that this quarter with a very sizable buyback that they had this quarter.
All right, Goldman shares perfectly flat in the pre-market. Gerard Cassidy of RBC Capital Markets, thank you so much. Now coming up, we'll take a look at the companies making the most social buzz today. That's next. This is Bloomberg.
Was going to keep Green World Cup. This is a 3
as the economic picture
covering the intersections of Hollywood, Silicon Valley, and beyond.
Bloomberg has enhanced search on the terminal to deliver what you need when you need it. Now, you can simply type phrases in everyday English in the command line. Compare financials. Find people. Analyze markets. You can enter phrases or ask questions. What do you want to know today? Ask a question or visit SearchGo to find answers now.
Middle East and Africa, vibrant resources and high-yield investment opportunities abound. Join me on Horizons Middle East and Africa for the stories, newsmakers, and insight from this exciting region. Now weekdays, only on Bloomberg.
All right, it's time now for Social Climbers. Look at the companies making waves on social media this morning. And let's actually just talk about one, and that is Macy's, ending talks with Ark House Management and Brigade Capital Management on their buyout proposal for the department store chain, saying that an increased offer still failed to have compelling value and lacked financial certainty. So the company will embark on a standalone turnaround plan. You can see not a lot of confidence in that in the pre-market from investors. Macy's shares currently down about 15%. Let me read that headline once more. Macy's ending its buyout discussions with Ark House and Brigade. This is Bloomberg.
linear business is not going anywhere. The sports business is moving is going to figure itself out between digital and linear. It's an unbelievably healthy market. They all have to be in it. They all want to be, every single one of the players want to be in it because of the audience. We have two assets in the sports business that are year-long, don't have a season. I don't believe prices are going down. You're going to figure out the bifurcation of the rights and give things up, not give things up.
How long do you think it is before Netflix actually jumps into sports?
You know, they're in sports right now, but they just do the shoulder programming.
Yeah.
I think their point of view, and you'll ask Ted tomorrow, is we build up we don't want to be in the bidding of rights and then not have any long tail. So I'm not sure. They did bid on Formula One, but ESPN got it. So I think that was a smaller package, meaning smaller economics. So we'll see.
Bloomberg covers the world with unmatched reach and resources. From more than 120 countries, the moment news breaks, 24 hours a day. Bloomberg, context changes everything.
All right, it's 20 seconds until the starting bell. This is Bloomberg Open Interest. I'm Matt Miller. We do see futures higher this morning. Right now, across the indexes, on the S&P 500, you can see futures higher about 0.5%. On the New York Stock Exchange, Bank Creek Capital Advisors ringing the bell because they have a new ETF, BCUS. And then on the NASDAQ, we see Whole Foods ringing the opening bell. A lot of talk today about the effects that we may see in this market from the attempted assassination on Saturday of former President Donald Trump. Will those Trump trade stocks, DJT, for example, but also banks, oil and gas, healthcare stocks, really see a lift on the increased odds that Trump wins the election in November? Katie, what do you see in terms of the broader market?
Yeah, at least on the index level, there is a lot of green on the screen behind me. To start this trading week, you can see the S&P 500 currently higher by about 0.4%. The Dow currently leading the way. It doesn't happen too often, but the Dow up about 0.7%. Big tech also holding its own. The NASDAQ 100 up about 0.4%, of course, as trading just gets started. But one stock to watch, of course, is Apple, really rising after sales in India hit a record of almost $8 billion. Apple, of course, wants to challenge Android's dominance in the country, so this is a good sign. And you can see shares currently higher by about 2%, Shanali.
Katie, I'm also keeping an eye on bank stocks. Of course, Goldman reporting a surge in profit as trading tops estimates. Morgan Stanley on deck to report tomorrow. Goldman up about 0.8%. Morgan Stanley actually down about 0.4%. And you've got to watch the trading figures here. Big competition. Goldman coming in above where Morgan Stanley was expected in equities trading, Matt.
All right, and shares of Trump media continue to rise as well. That's the DJT. I was mentioning the chances of another term for the president, former president, really driving that stock higher. Let's get over to Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle. She has a closer look at the Trump trade we're talking about.
That's right, Matt. The Trump trade really getting a boost today. This, of course, as you were mentioning, after the attempted assassination of Donald Trump. And I would also argue his reaction, defiance, bold, fearless. We have DJT up 43%. This is the best day since it started trading on the NASDAQ. You were mentioning oil, gas, banks, so many different sectors to take a look at them. One of them is healthcare. Humana, the health insurer, up nearly 3%. Of course, he wanted to repeal the Affordable Healthcare in his last term, so we're getting this bid. Bitcoin, the risk on, the certainty, there's now a 40% spread from a betting perspective that Trump will beat Biden, or if you were to look at Kamala Harris, even more so. And then the peso, he of course in his last term was not friendly to Mexico, so we have the dollar rising against the peso in a big way. Let's take another way to look at this certainty though. If we take a look at the VIX curve in the Bloomberg terminal, back here in April, the VIX curve for the month of October rising close to a 20 handle. You can see the whole curve elevated relative to the VIX itself. That's a way of saying that there was fear, volatility, uncertainty around the election. It is still elevated, but now what had been a 20 handle for October is 17. That's also the case for December and January, coming in a little bit more. That is the effect of certainty on the VIX curve, Katie.
All right, Abigail Doodle, thank you so much for that roundup. And joining us now for a broader conversation, I'm pleased to say we have Scott Cronert. He is Citi U.S. equity strategist here on set with us. It's great to see you in person.
Great being here, thanks.
So you wrote a note on Friday, basically about Trump's momentum increasing, taking a look at the different policies that could come about in a second Trump term. That, of course, was before the tragic events of this weekend. But when you think about just the market math and the calculus that investors are doing, has anything meaningfully changed between now and Friday?
I think since Friday, no. The answer is we went into the weekend with a presumption that the Trump lead over Biden had increased to a point where you had to factor that in as a most likely outcome. Now, we have to be also aware that the situation can change as news flow evolves from here. And the policy discussions evolve from here. But for now, yeah, we've been presuming that a higher chance of a Trump win.
It's not just a Trump win, though. I mean, the idea that many have been talking about is would-be Republican voters are actually going to go to the polls, and they are going to vote for Donald Trump and then Republicans down the line. So you have a much higher chance of a Republican sweep of both houses and the White House. Wouldn't that make a huge difference in terms of policy?
It does, in terms of how you think about a policy implementation. So you're absolutely right. With the Trump victory, we've been presuming a red wave, and so he controls both House and Senate. Senate likely going Republican in either event. Biden, we'd been presuming is sort of a split Congress, which means that the agenda is a little bit murkier in terms of what can actually get passed. So I think when you're looking at a Trump playbook, the first place you go is to what did he do in his first term? And we're allowing that, hey, market's seen that playbook before. We've seen a focus on lower taxes. We've seen a focus on deregulation. So some of those aspects will persist this time, but the magnitude in terms of a positive shock effect to equities may not be what it was then.
Well, one big question, too, because you see the magnitude of that equity rally really feeding into the market now, cross-currency moves as well, cross-bond markets. How much conviction do you put into these trades this early in the election cycle?
Well, we have to allow that with ex-President Trump in particular, the narrative can change, and he'll shift with where the polls and other inputs tend to take him. And so we have to allow that what we're talking about now may not become reality. The example is back in January, we were first writing about the election and said, gosh, this 10% across-the-board tariff, that's a pretty big negative. Oh, don't worry, by the time he actually gets to office, it'll be something watered down. And so you're always kind of wondering and watching for incremental information flows that allow you to, potentially change your views. Hasn't happened so far in this case.
Well, it's a great point. And of course, there's a long way to go before the actual election and then before the actual presidency. But let's talk about some of the things that are in the conversation right now. When it comes to the Trump trade, you have banks, drug makers, oil and gas. Obviously, the Steve Kerpener is working its way through the bond market. Are we looking in the right places, though? Are those sort of the trades and the asset classes that should be under scrutiny?
We have a little bit different view on the Trump tariffs. Okay, so let's start with that. And our view is that the Trump tariffs in and of themselves are probably equity negative. Essentially what it does for us is conjure up memories of the supply chain dislocations that we had coming out of the pandemic. And so on their own, the Trump tariff talk, 10% across the board, in our view, begins to add uncertainty to the fundamental outlook. So that's point number one. Point number two is in terms of the deregulatory push, got that. That makes sense. We've seen some of that playbook before. Where we end up on this is my third point is that we view the banks as probably the cleanest Trump trade, if you will. Valuations for that part of the index are not stretched to begin with, so you've got more shots on goal from a fundamental perspective, steepening curve as you point to, Katie. And so all told that we think when you add in the potential for some deregulatory relief, the banks jump out at at us as sort of an easiest path of resistance, if you will, in terms of playing a Trump win.
What do you think about big tech? I mean, Sonali brought it up in our morning meeting. Deregulation is going to have an effect on them as well. But also, you know, they're a hedge for everything, right? Because it's a safe place to put your money.
Well, so I think the way we're thinking about that, a little bit different. So there's no question that you're seeing some fraying around the edges in the broader economic situation. We know that, you know, we're getting closer to a Fed pivot point, which is something that we've all been talking about for some time now. So when you think about big tech, we use this notion of growth being defensive, and I think that's where we are with this. As you go down this path of potential, you know, change in Fed direction, ongoing economic uncertainty as we're seeing the labor markets come off and so forth, big tech becomes a safe haven in that regard because there's more comfort in fundamentals, and the valuation support you get from a Fed pivot support that. So a lot of times we look at this, the recession discussion, which is, you know, City House view, and you ask yourself the question, how are you going to navigate across that economic valley? And growth being defensive, which plays to big tech, is usually one way of thinking about that.
That is Scott Kroner of Citigroup. He's sticking with us. Before we go to break, I do want to bring you some updates from Goldman Sachs' earnings call this morning. Of course, kicking off the call, speaking to the events over the weekend, saying it is a sad moment for our country and urges people to treat one another with civility. He says that he hopes this will spur reflection and action. Of course, now also getting started with analysts. Speaking to Goldman's own results this morning, Goldman shares actually rising almost 2% into the market open, more than 2%. Of course, really profiting from the volatility in markets as they come, saying that they have a very strong backlog there in investment banking. We will get you more as we have him. Coming up, the analyst action that you need to know this morning, that's up next in our top calls. Stick with us. This is Bloomberg.
Today's CFOs are reshaping the C-suite. Bloomberg's chief future officer shines a spotlight on these dynamic leaders.
It's an incredibly fun job, for sure.
We're in the business of leading beyond the numbers.
To me, teamwork is key. You need to identify opportunities and push people.
It's not about how to say no, it's about how to say yes.
Their impact goes far beyond the balance sheet. And on Chief Future Officer, they focus on much more than just revenues and margins.
Today's CFO has to be much, much more than a bookkeeper. I talk more about culture today than I talk about numbers.
It's not just about debits and credits and digits and dollar signs.
It's a lot more than the profit today. It's building the future of tomorrow.
Get passion, perspective, and more from the Chief Future Officers of some of the world's most influential companies. New episodes this summer, only on Bloomberg. Brought to you by Workday.
From the beating heart of global finance, economics, and politics, and wherever newsmakers are moving markets, Bloomberg brings you conversations that allow for deep discussions and important insights. What do you think the future is for inflation? Is this a new normal? Are markets too optimistic? How do you worry about the things that are outside your control? How does the current fighting completely stop? I'm Francine Lacroix, and this is The Pulse, every weekday only on Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg.
In a multi-trillion-dollar industry, there's a lot of ground to cover.
Bitcoin ETFs rubbing elbows with the big dogs.
This frenzy has engulfed the entire world.
We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. Bloomberg ETF IQ, only on Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg News Now.
News when you want it at the touch of a button.
Another volatile day on Wall Street. We're seeing big moves.
All eyes on Capitol Hill as Democrats and Republicans prepare.
Today's job numbers casting doubt on the Fed's next move. Inflation remains front and center. And that's news when you want it with Bloomberg News Now. Get it 24/7 on the Bloomberg Business app, Bloomberg.com, and anywhere you get your podcasts.
Bloomberg News Now. Context changes everything.
This is Bloomberg Open Interest. Let's get a quick check at what's going on in the markets. First off, S&P 500 up about 0.5% right now, so big gains really across the board helping to drive that index higher. You do see the 30-year yield right now up almost 5 basis points. This is interesting because the 2-year yield is coming down right now, and at one point we saw 120 basis points of inversion between these two, and it's back to zero right now on the Trump trade. Bitcoin also a piece of the Trump trade. If you look at Bitcoin since Friday, it's actually up more than 10% on optimism that a Trump administration would be friendlier to crypto. Katie?
All right, it's time now for some of our top calls. Some of the analyst action that's in focus this morning. And first up, Oppenheimer removing Ulta Beauty from its top picks. The analysts say that the retailer's, quote, aggressive promotions suggest ongoing challenges and cites potential risks to its guidance. Next up, we have Citi downgrading Electronic Arts to a neutral. The analyst sees limited upside for the video game company following recent gains. And finally, Morgan Stanley naming Apple as a top pick. The analyst saying that the tech giant's artificial intelligence platform can spur a multi-year refresh cycle. And Apple was also upgraded at Loop Capital Markets. And Shonali, we heard something similar from Steve Eisman last week, actually.
We sure did. And to talk more about Apple, the banks, and the rest of the stock market, Scott Kroner, Citigroup U.S. equity strategist, still with us this morning. And of course, we were talking about the political ramifications for stocks, but also we're knee deep in the start of earnings season. You saw some promising results out from Goldman this morning, but you didn't see promising results so far from a lot of the companies that we've seen. How much risk is there in this season?
I think the risk is that we get what we'll call a beat and hold, where we see a very persistent positive surprise dynamic with the Q2 reporting period. We're completely expecting this, but we're also expecting, as a function of that macro environment softening a little bit over the past couple of months, that most C-suites will be sort of, let's say cautionary or glass half empty in terms of their commentary. So what this means is good earnings results, a little bit less follow through in terms of an upward revision bias to the numbers. And so we just have to be attentive that that's going on in the background while we're getting closer and closer to this mythical Fed pivot point.
But in terms of earnings, right, we have been touting the 3 quarters in a row of earnings expansion. But of course, that's only like, 10 or 20 companies that have been growing earnings. Right. The rest have been in an earnings recession for like 1.5 years now. Are we coming out of that this quarter? And are you going to see the other 493 companies on the S&P 500 start to increase profits and increase outlooks?
That's the setup. Okay, we've been talking about this as for going on a year now, as it turns out. If you go back and look, you've had earnings recessions flow through growth and then cyclicals and defensives since the middle part of 22. So we're completely on board that from an earnings progression perspective, we're leaving 2 flattish years of S&P earnings growth behind. 23, even though the other 493 doesn't look like it's keeping track with tech, you're still on path to grow 6% this year, which is a market acceleration. We think that it picks up going into 2025. Essentially what happens is that you get more and more sectors moving to a positive growth dynamic, which is different than what we had in 2023.
Is that enough, though, to ignite that sort of broadening out when it comes to the stock market performance? Because 6% growth, I mean, it sounds pretty good, but I feel like we've been spoiled by the types of numbers that big tech puts up.
So I think what we have to think about is, I'm going to kind of use the phrase leadership versus broadening. A lot of people want to say, well, gee, what about equal weight S&P? Isn't that how I should play a broadening? I think it's the wrong way to think about that. Well, we have to acknowledge and presume that mega cap growth is providing a fundamental and price performance leadership, but other sectors become very important in helping the index actually begin to or continue to hit new highs. So the actual broadening, if you will, is other sectors now contributing to aggregate index performance. And I think that's actually an implicit positive. It's part of how you begin lifting your S&P 500 targets.
Well, let's get specific and talk about some of those sectors, because I talked to a lot of people, a lot of heartbroken bulls who have been waiting for such as energy, healthcare, et cetera, to sort of pick up the slack here. But which sectors, which industries actually have the potential to follow through on that?
So what we're doing, the way we've been aligning this, Katie, and we started to play this going into Q2, and now we're reaffirming it going into Q3, is, okay, we get it. Mega cap growth is has important fundamental drivers. We want to be holders of that part of the market, right? So we're all in on that trade. But where you want to be putting new money to work is down those areas of the market that should be a beneficiary of an inflecting Fed. So that's consumer discretionary more broadly. That's financials more broadly. We even took real estate to an overweight as a way to express this. So we're trying to pivot away from traditional economic sensitivity, where we have some economic frame to contend with, down a path to let's participate in those areas that should be a more direct beneficiary of lower Fed funds rates.
You know, it's interesting. We were talking about the banks, bringing us some more headlines from Goldman's earnings call. They plan to moderate the pace of share buybacks. Now, of course, we know, yes, that is a hard thing for investors. Capital return is the big story. Goldman or otherwise, if you look across the equity market, how important is it for companies right now to commit to that extra dividend, to their share buybacks at this point in time?
The big picture here is that we talk about earnings, right? Free cash flow is poised to inflect this year, and we think for the S&P grow 10% this year, and probably the same, if not more, next year. So with free cash flow generation comes a lot of what we call financial flexibility. And so we have to allow that within that framework. There's room for any combination of repurchase, which is obviously something investors are looking for, dividend growth, CapEx expenditures, and even debt pay down. So what we're suggesting here is the underlying financial flexibility behind improving free cash is positive in many ways. It doesn't just have to be share repurchase.
Yeah, well, we'll see, of course. It feels like dividends were the story of last earnings season. Maybe that will follow through this one as well.
Maybe they need to invest in AI.
Perhaps, yeah, that increase the CapEx there. Scott, it's always great to see you. Really appreciate you taking the time. That, of course, is Scott Cronert of Citi. Now, coming up, Goldman's advisory fees missed, but trading soars. We're going to dig into those results and more in our Wall Street Beat next. This is Bloomberg.
It is a sad moment for our country. There is no place in our politics for violence. I urge people to come together and to treat one another with respect, civility, dignity, especially when we disagree. cannot afford division and distrust to get the better of us. I truly hope this is a moment that will spur reflection and action that celebrate what unites us as citizens and as a society.
That was Goldman Sachs CEO David Solomon speaking moments ago on the bank's earnings call, and Goldman tops today's Wall Street beat. A mixed bag for earnings over at Goldman Sachs. Advisory fees coming in below estimates in the second quarter, offsetting a surge in profit as fixed income trading and equity trading helped drive better than expected results. And if you look at Goldman's earnings, of course, shares rising into the market right now. They did say they would moderate buybacks, as we had discussed, but also this interesting thing, remember, with advisory fees, coming in below estimates, you have to believe in that second half rebound in deals, guys.
Which may be tough, right? If deals flow is hampered by a presidential election, we're not going to get back to the kind of numbers that we've seen in previous years around this volatile event.
Right. I mean, a lot of this depends on the actual environment. There's not a ton that Goldman can do about that. But it was interesting speaking to Gerard Cassidy just a little bit ago, and him saying that, I mean, Goldman is still first in class, basically saying that this is kind of a blip.
They're number one. Listen, they're number one on league tables, and I've got to say, in equities trading, they came in above JP Morgan, and they're slated to come in above Morgan Stanley. Of course, Morgan Stanley is the long-standing kind of hero in that business. But, there's another stock we are watching. That is BlackRock, hauling in $51 billion of client cash to its long-term investment funds in the second quarter, pushing the world's largest money manager to a record $10.6 trillion of assets. Wow. And as Eric Balchunas points out this morning, that much money gives it more AUM than Fidelity, Cap Group, Invesco, and Franklin combined. Yeah. Yet you are seeing the stock under pressure this morning.
Yeah, I mean, they're just a behemoth. I don't know about the stock reaction. It feels like we see a similar thing with the big banks posting up these huge numbers and then a disappointment. I will say, I mean, BlackRock is so dominant when it comes to mutual funds, when it comes to ETFs. Interesting to couch this in this push that they're making into private assets. I mean, we've seen them make acquisitions to that effect when it comes to global infrastructure partners. When it comes to Preqin and this real push to basically index the private markets, you have to think when you're BlackRock and you're trying to expand, that's a natural place.
You also have to keep in mind that although a lot of people on the left are angry with BlackRock for investing in, for example, gun makers, people on the right are not huge fans of BlackRock and Larry Fink. So after the events that we saw this weekend and the fact that BlackRock said the shooter was in one of our commercials, it's not a huge shock to see the stock down a little bit.
And we do have some breaking news, actually, when it comes to the political sphere and President Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump. The Trump judge dismissing that Florida classified documents case, the judge finding the special counsel appointment unconstitutional. I'll read that one more time, that the judge in that Trump case dismisses the Florida classified documents case. So, again, it really speaks to the moment that we're in. This is a very highly political time, a lot of political news coming through. And, of course, Donald Trump is a candidate that has a lot of legal issues ahead of him still.
You know, it's really interesting. I found myself wondering after I heard from President Biden that he called Donald Trump, and then we saw that Oval Office address, if he doesn't pardon the former president in an effort to bring the country together, right? Everyone's now talking about unity instead of attacking each other the way they were on that debate stage. And, this is one of those cases that Trump has to look forward to falling away.
You have to wonder how much that unity ticket really matters going into November.
All right, fascinating headlines. Just to reiterate that, the judge in Trump's Florida case, that's the classified documents case, has dismissed it, citing an unconstitutional, what that judge calls an unconstitutional appointment of a special counsel there. I want to give you the trading diary, what you need to be watching this week. Bloomberg has special coverage on the ground in Milwaukee for the Republican National Convention, and you can bet they're going to be talking a lot about this dismissal there. Fed Chair Jay Powell is going to be speaking to Bloomberg's David Rubenstein at noon today. We'll bring you that live as it happens. You can also watch it on the terminal, TLIV Go. And then bank earnings continue tomorrow. Morgan Stanley and Bank America are next up in terms of reporting after Goldman Sachs today. U.S. retail sales are also due tomorrow. And on Thursday, we'll get the European Central Bank decision. Coming up this hour, or in the next hour, I should say, Chris Morangi, Gabelli Funds co-chief investment officer, joins us, how he's setting up his trades going into the election. This is Bloomberg.
Arch has laid plenty of groundwork for future revenue, but for now, Mark Messler's most pressing challenge as CFO is conserving capital.
You have to have the short-term discipline to sort of circle the wagons around cash. I mean, cash is oxygen. I know where every ounce of cash is going, and but we also have to be nimble around that as well because things change by the day.
Archer went public in 2021 in a reverse merger with a SPAC, Ken Moelis's Atlas Crest Investments. Through August 2023, the company raised over $1 billion from investors, including Stellantis, Boeing, United Airlines, and Cathie Wood's ARK Investment Management.
Does that ARK investment open doors for you to bring in different kinds of institutional money going forward?
It does. I mean, I think there's a lot of credibility that comes in with an investor like ARK. As I think about, my top targeted list of investors over the next 2 to 3 years, an investment like that gives us some credibility and gives us a little bit of staying power as I go in and talk to other investors.
With the SPAC pipe now closed, Archer's facing a new phase of raising capital.
I know the folks who aren't willing to invest right now may have large pockets of investment in the future. So I want to be in front of them. I'm wanting to show them progress. I want to create credibility with them that we are marching towards our goals of commercialization.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been the U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fat?
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
These are two big-time blue-chip companies.
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good Monday morning from the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio in New York City to our worldwide audience. We're also streaming live on YouTube, so head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg podcast, and that's where you'll find us, Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney. Looking at this big news over the weekend. We're trying to stay on top of it. We're going to check it out with Jody Schneider, political news director for Bloomberg TV and Radio. She's going to join us and preview the Republican National Convention coming up in Milwaukee. It seems like everybody's, as quote Tom Keene, is ripping up the script as it comes to this convention coming up. So we'll bring you the latest. Neil Sipes, Bloomberg Intelligence financials analyst, he talked to us about BlackRock getting larger as we speak. We're also going to break down the Goldman Sachs earnings with Allison Williams later in the show. So a lot going on. We're going to stay on top of these markets. We do have green on the screen here. We'll stay on top of that and on earnings as well. Right now, let's go to Lisa Mateo and get a Bloomberg Business Flash. Lisa.
You got it. We have Market Drivers brought to you by IBKR. Financial advisors switch to Interactive Brokers for lowest cost, global trading, and turnkey custody solutions. No ticket charges and no conflicts of your interest at ibkr.com/RIA. All right, the market's definitely reacting to the events over the weekend. We have the dollar stronger, stocks advancing. The 30-year yield rose above the 2-year yield for the first time since January. So let's get to the specifics. We'll start with stocks because we are on records watch. The S&P 500 up 0.4%, 24 points, 5,640. The Dow up 0.3%, 150 points, 40,151. And we have the Nasdaq up 0.6%, 117 points, 18,517. The 2-year yield 4.45%. 4.5%. That's little change. The 10-year yield, 4.22%. That's up 4 basis points. But the 30-year, 4.46%, and that's up 6 basis points. Now, the assassination attempts we talked about also pushed Bitcoin briefly above 63,000 as Trump positioned himself as pro-crypto. So right now we have Bitcoin up 4% at 62,953. Crypto-related stocks also seeing a push. We have Coinbase Global. That's up about 9%. Marathon Digital Holdings up nearly 7%. Economic data out today. New York State factory activity contracted for an 8th straight month in July. Also, a measure of prices received by producers that fell to a one-year low. Tomorrow, we get retail sales for June. Wednesday, the Fed issues its Beige Book economic survey. Also this week, housing starts, industrial production. Finally, want to end off with big bank earnings. Goldman Sachs right now up about 0.5%. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Alex.
All right, thank you so much, Lisa Mateo. I'm Alex Deal alongside Paul Sweeney. Happy Monday. Quite a Monday it is. You know, Paul, for all the geopolitics and the political strife that we see and that Trump trade that we keep talking about, I do want to go to small caps.
Okay.
Because they're up over 1% still. So now we've seen a solid 3-day rally.
Yep.
And the question really is this a true rotation that has legs? Or does earnings season need to come in and really prove itself? And this is truly like fundamental to the actual underlying of the equity market.
It is, because a lot of folks, looking at this concentration risk in the equity markets, that's really been a big concern in Magnificent Seven, really driving all the performance. But to the extent you can see some broadening breadth, I guess, in this marketplace, certainly from a technical perspective, if nothing else, that's got to be a positive.
Yeah, and just take a look at financials, the best performing sector within the S&P today, which brings us to Norma Linda, Bloomberg News, joining us for some of the individual movers. And you're kicking it off with Goldman Sachs. Right when earnings came out, it didn't do much. The stock was kind of like, I'm not sure how I feel about this. But now we know how we feel about this.
Exactly. I mean, we are seeing shares lower, but some interesting things to point out that we did see coming out of these earnings is that its profit surge coming out of Goldman Sachs as we're looking at the earnings for the second quarter. Both fixed income and equity traders did outpace analyst expectations. So you do have some positive read-through there for Goldman Sachs. But what's bringing it to the downside is a headline that we saw coming from the CFO that said that it has plans to moderate the pace of its share buybacks. And so we are seeing a bit of a pullback here in trading this morning, lower as we are coming through here at about 10 a.m.
But that all-important, fixed income, commodities, currencies, all that FIC sector, that's kind of has been for a lot of these big investment banks, the driver, kind of one of the businesses to focus on. And they beat estimates. So it's the banking business, whether it's the deals or the advisory work, still kind of soft across the street. Although it seems like every executive saying, our pipeline looks good. Our pipeline looks good. So maybe that's for later in the year into next year.
Definitely. And I mean, as you mentioned, we are looking at the advisory fees that did come in below estimates here for Goldman. So that is another thing that is a bit of a ding on the negative side.
Yeah, that's interesting because usually they wind up crushing when it comes to M&A and advisory fees for JP Morgan, for example. So that's going to be interesting as that winds up shaking out. You're also looking at Macy's. Walk us through what's going on here.
So I'm watching Macy's because it's seeing a double-digit drop this morning in trading. Shares are plunging as much as 16%. Now, that's the worst day in 4 years. And this is coming off of some news that it unanimously decided to end talks with its PE firms, Arkhouse and Brigade, who were looking to come in and save this company. And so we are seeing Nordstrom and Kohl's, other companies here, trading down in sympathy. But this is really some interesting news to digest right now, especially as people have really been seeing Macy's on the rocks and they're looking for some sort of savior here.
I have to admit, I don't know either of those PE firms, which when I first saw the news about the deal, I was like, who are these guys? I mean, it's not KKR or somebody like that, a household name. So, but again, the market not liking what they see here. And again, it kind of goes to the future of this company. I mean, the stock is down, down 15% today, down about almost 20% year to date. So it's got a market cap of $4.5 billion. So I don't know where they go from here. Well,
they probably go to more sales. I mean, I'm making that up completely. But this, knowing that I only shop on sales, this is what I think of when I see Macy's down 15%. Before we let you go, Nora, just talk us through sort of the Trump trade as we've been sort of diving through the market. You look at gold, you look at Bitcoin, you look at what's happening with the yield curve, et cetera. How is that playing out in the equity market?
Right, so lots to digest, especially after the failed assassination attempt of former President Donald Trump on Saturday. So we are seeing several stocks reacting off of this. But some interesting ones to point out are, of course, Trump Media, that's ticker DJT. We know that this stock has had a lot of volatility since it first de-SPAC'd, but we did see shares jumping as much as 50% for their best day since March. But some other sectors that I'm watching are private prison stocks. We've got Geo Group Inc. and Core Civic. They are rising, seeing some upward movement here, especially as people are having some predictions that Trump is seeing some strength and maybe towards some sort of Republican win as we are coming toward November. So I'm watching those private prison stocks as well as gun stocks, gun makers, crypto, as you called out, and tech.
All right, thanks so much, Nor. We really appreciate also solar stocks are getting hit pretty hard in the S&P. Nor Melinda of Bloomberg helping us out in the equity market. All right, let's get back to this breaking news. Apparently, a federal judge has dismissed the criminal case against Donald Trump, accusing him of mishandling classified information. We are going to break down that as well as the failed assassination attempt, and also the RNC with Jody Schneider, political news director for Bloomberg Television and Radio, is joining us. Jody, what did you make of that headline in regards to the classified documents case?
Yeah, very interesting. It's one of the 4 criminal cases brought against Donald Trump. We didn't expect it to probably go to trial this year, but the fact that it's being thrown out is another really big plus for the former president, and especially as he ramps up his campaign. This throwing it out means they'll have to start, over again. They basically said that Jackson was unconstitutionally appointed, and we don't have a whole lot more comment than that. We're just now reading through what the decision was to do this. But this is a big win for the former president. We've seen one conviction in a criminal case in New York. We don't expect the other 2, the case in Georgia or the case in on January 6th in the D.C. circuit, to go to trial this year. And this one now is being tossed out.
All right, Jody, let's get to the news of the weekend. I know you're in Milwaukee, the site of the Republican National Convention here. What's the early read as to what extent, if any, that near-death experience the president experienced over the weekend will change him, his politics, his rhetoric, his actions? Will we see any of that in Milwaukee?
We may see some of that. First of all, it will make it more likely that voters, that his supporters who are gathering here under very tight security, by the way, will be more fervent in their admiration of him. We expect it to be almost like a coronation of him for the nomination for the Republican Party. So we think that we have heard, and there's some reporting that he is changing his speech. He will give the acceptance speech for the nomination on Thursday night here. We've heard that he may be changing the speech to try to reach out more. So there may be sort of a softening, if you will, in terms of a more appeal to, broader swath of voters, and trying to use that to get some of those voters, perhaps swing state voters, to bring them in, using the experience of this to try to call for unity. We'll have to see, but there is some reporting that that will be the case. For President Biden, it makes it tougher.
Hey, Jody, you've been in Milwaukee for a couple days, right? What has changed on the ground? Can you just give us some color as to the energy, the focus that's been on the ground over the last 2 days?
Yeah, well, we have seen really tightening security. We just, some colleagues and I just walked over here to this space, and we had to go through a security perimeter and out of a security perimeter. It took us twice to 3 times as long as it did when I walked over here on Saturday. So there's certainly that. We're seeing, police from as far away as, other states in the Midwest. Some I just ran into were from Ohio. A lot of Secret Service. They have made it very, very clear that there will be extraordinarily tight security here in Milwaukee. We've talked to some people on the ground, and most of them supporters, of the former president and Republicans, say that they are very relieved that the president wasn't badly hurt in that shooting in Butler, Pennsylvania the other day. They're also saying that this more than ever, shows them that they want to support him. Some Democrats we've run into say they're glad he's okay, but that they hope that the political violence will that something now can be done about political violence, that now that it's come to this.
Jody, just lastly, Vice President
selection here. Any inside track as to when and who that may be?
No, we are, the former president arrived last night here in Milwaukee, and we're expecting that VP selection announcement anytime. Some say they think it could come today. The vice president is traditionally nominated on Wednesday night at the convention, so it's got to be before then. But there is some thinking it could come today.
All right. Jody, thank you so much for joining us. Jody Schneider, political news director for Bloomberg Television and Radio, joins remotely from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, at the site of the Republican National Convention. Let's move over to the world of financial stocks here. Goldman Sachs, they had some numbers came out today, a little bit better than expected. We're going to break them down later with Allison Williams from Bloomberg Intelligence. Also, interesting story out of BlackRock. It's just extraordinary how big they are. $10.6 trillion assets. And they're citing ETF as a big reason here. Neil Sipes joins us, financials analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence, joins us here in studio. Neil, talk to us about BlackRock. It's obviously a monster financial institution, but I think it's probably the biggest financial institution people don't know about.
Yeah.
What's the news today on BlackRock?
I think obviously over the past 18 months, banks have been much more in the focus. Asset managers, maybe a little bit of a sleepier name, so to speak. But like you said, BlackRock eclipsing $10.5 trillion. Of course, a lot of that is due to markets. We're up, 15, 20% so far year to date. But BlackRock, sort of that perennial grower in the industry where organic growth, those flows from institutional retail clients have been harder to come by. BlackRock, having that breadth and diversity of the platform, has really been able to deliver growth through varying market cycles. We think that's one of their strengths and why they're the leader in the space in terms of size. In terms of the second quarter, organic growth a little bit lighter than expected. Part of that due to the fact that we saw some larger institutional clients sort of rebalancing portfolios. That's just sort of natural in the business, especially when you're at all-time highs. Nonetheless, margin really improved. Again, that's on the heels of stronger markets. Most of the revenue here is asset-based fees. So as markets move higher, the top line expands as well. And so really, you highlighted the last thing, I guess, ETFs, another strong suit. That's really the bread and butter of BlackRock. Again, and obviously now with some of that private markets push that we've seen in the past couple months.
When do they hit the law of large numbers thing?
Yeah, I think that is becoming the more popular question for BlackRock.
But I can ask this question forever, right? And they still do it.
Yeah, and they continue to target this 5% organic base fee growth figure. They've been lagging that over the past couple of quarters. Obviously, markets, since the beginning of 2022 were less conducive. They've been more conducive for the past 3 quarters or so. But the question still remains, how do you continue to grow at that 5% clip when you're talking about a $10 trillion asset base? And we think BlackRock's diversity, when assets are in motion, they can continue to garner share from less diversified, less price or these competitors.
Stock hasn't done anything this year, kind of up 1% just on the year, lagging the market. What's the investment call here on BlackRock? What are the investors saying?
Yeah, so I think a lot of what's been baked into this year is sort of market growth, which is going to be a benefit to all asset managers in the space. So I think the skepticism of, are these gains lasting? What happens obviously in November when we get this eventual Fed pivot to cuts? How is that going to impact client allocations? How is that going to impact the business model? But we do think BlackRock is is positioned to benefit in pretty much all market cycles. And a lot of that long-term story is now shifting into that private markets focus with Preqin acquisition just announced a couple weeks ago and Global Infrastructure Partners in January.
Can I ask a really dumb question? At this point, who are BlackRock's actual competitors? Like, who can actually compete with this company?
Yeah, so there are plenty of competitors. I mean, asset management can be somewhat commoditized in a lot of spaces. There's competitors like a Vanguard. There's competitors like a Schwab, Invesco, Franklin, T. Rowe Price. There's plenty of names out there. The question is who's able to compete on price with BlackRock, and that's where scale really becomes paramount here, because they can continue to innovate with new products. If a new competitor comes out with, a new flashy product, BlackRock tends to match that and can sometimes beat it on price. And we know that BlackRock is entrenched with pretty much every institutional client, every retail client, so to speak, and that really gives them the strength of distribution to kind of leverage across its platform.
All right, really good stuff. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. And all of your insight, Neil. Neil Sipes, Bloomberg Intelligence financials analyst. The numbers are so big, it's like hard to comprehend.
I know. It's
like how big this company actually is.
Yeah, and it's across the board in all asset classes.
Yeah.
So the ETFs being a new source of assets there. And it kind of begs the question, like I grew up with the mutual fund business, the Fidelities, the T. Rowe Prices. It just seems like all the money's going to ETFs, and even the mutual funds are converting to ETFs. So that seems to be the wrapper of choice.
Well, you definitely see mutual funds, though, trying to get out like a better message now.
Yeah.
Like they're all hiring like people to do internal videos and like put messaging out there in a way that they never really had to before. Anyway, we're going to talk much more about the markets. Coming up, Shana Sissel, President and CEO of Banrion Capital Management, will be joining us for her broad take on the market. I'm still looking at those small caps up by over 1%. You are listening to Bloomberg Intelligence. Very busy morning on this Monday. Happy Monday. This is Bloomberg.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Stocks advancing, and this is after an assassination attempt on Donald Trump. It kind of sparked thoughts that another Trump presidency would create a more expansive fiscal policy. Right now, you have the NASDAQ up 0.7%, 135 points at 18,534. The Dow up 0.4%, 181 points at 40,182. And we have the S&P 500 up 0.5%, 29 points at 5,644. The news also pushing shares of Trump Media and Technology Group higher. Right now, they're up nearly 32%. And private prison operators, firearm-related companies, also among stocks rallying after those assassination attempts. You have places like GEO Group, Core Civic right now. GEO up about 9%, Core Civic Group up about 7%, and gun stocks, Smith & Wesson brands, right now up more than 12%. To the bond market we go, the 2-year yield at 4.46%. That's little change. The yield on the 10-year, 4.23%. That's up 4 basis points. We'll take it to the 30-year at 4.46%, and that's up 6 basis points. Quick check of commodities. We have spot gold higher at $2,421 an ounce. Brent crude, $84 a barrel. WTI crude, $81 a barrel. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Alex.
All right, thanks so much, Lisa Mateo. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. Happy Monday, everybody. We are broadcasting to you live from Interactive Broker Studio right here in Midtown Manhattan. There are two very interesting things evolving in the market. One is earnings, and what do we do with a value trade? What do we do with small caps? And the other is the Trump trade effect, that if Trump wins the presidency after the events over the weekend, what that winds up looking like for the market. So there's lots of different stuff to dissect. So we want to go to Shana Sizzle, President and CEO of Ben-Rayon Capital Management. She joins us from Chicago, Illinois. Shana, let's start off with the events over the weekend, the attempted assassination attempt to President Trump. There is a Trump trade in the market. Do you buy it? Like, is it real? I mean, typically, if you wind up trading stocks around who you think is going to be the president, that actually hasn't really paid off for you.
Well, I do think the Trump trade is real. I do think it's warranted. I think the events of the weekend actually bolster former President Trump's already the lead that he has. I think just, if you look across social media, a lot of folks who were not really Trump fans saw the events of this weekend as a reason to vote for him. In a way, that photo that came out is going to be iconic, and people saw it as like America, and look at the way he handled this. And I think all of those things play into market sentiment, and you're seeing that in the Trump trade.
All right, Shana, let's maybe step back from that. Kind of prior to this weekend, what was your market call, and has anything changed?
My market call was that we're in a period of slowing economic growth, that the Fed rate hikes have done their job in many respects. We're clearly seeing the economy slow. The Fed has made it clear that there's a likelihood that there will be a rate cut in September. And I don't think any of that has changed, in my opinion. I think we still have a slowing economic conditions, and we still have high probability that the Fed will make its first cut in September.
So the headline to that over the last 3 trading days has been buy small caps. Do you buy that?
Mm-hmm. Not necessarily. I'm very encouraged by the small cap rally. Small caps have done horribly for like 2 years and behaved in a way that we don't really have any like historical reference point for. Typically, small caps behave in a certain way technically, and they hadn't been doing that. So I'm encouraged by the small cap rally. We'd had a very long period of time where small caps did not make a new high, something like almost 2 years, I think. And so that is something I think is a good thing, but I don't necessarily think small caps benefit in the current market environment for a number of reasons. Higher rates is just harder for them to tap into the capital markets. They're not necessarily the biggest beneficiaries of the hottest trends that are pushing earnings and growth, like AI. And so for those reasons, I'm still cautious on small caps.
Conversely, how do you think about those magnificent 6 or 7 stocks which have been, such a driver of this market, accounting for, the large majority of performance?
So one of the things that you can see in the market right now is we're seeing some dispersion of returns, starting to see greater participation across
the S&P 500 outside of the Magnificent Seven, which is very positive. It's good for active managers. We touched on small caps. Active management in small cap has done absolutely phenomenal. And that's a perfect example of, why active management can work in certain areas of the market. And I think we're starting to see that a little bit outside of small caps and in large caps as we start to see the Mag 7 kind of take a breather. I think there's lots of other opportunities in the market to benefit from some of the hottest trends that people just aren't paying attention to.
So tell us, you have some nice stock picks here. Give us your top pick right now.
So I really like VRT. That's a second derivative player of the AI trade. So they do cooling systems for data centers. It's absolutely critical as we need more computing power for anything that is machine learning and artificial intelligence related. And they are the leading player with the top solutions when it comes to cooling, because a lot of computing power gets really hot and you certainly do not want things to overheat. So that's probably my favorite stock right now. It's the second derivative play of AI. And then I wanted to look outside of technology. Everybody kind of knows me as the NVIDIA girl, and, there's other places in the market. So Novartis is a healthcare name. Healthcare has not done great this year, but this is an opportunity to get in with a player that is doing some really cutting edge things in oncology in particular. And then I have Apple on my list. I just said, let's think outside of tech, and now I'm going to throw Apple at you. But that's a stock that hasn't participated as much as some of the others. We've seen a rally recently, but the stock is trading at, a reasonable valuation and has some really interesting opportunities going forward.
Hey, Shana, what do we know about this AI tech spending? We hear about it, from all sorts of companies. And I guess one of the questions I have is, how much of this AI spending is incremental versus maybe just shuffled from another tech budget, whether it's, information technology or something like that? What do we know about that?
Well, I would argue that AI should be part of your information technology budget because that's where it sits. I think that it is incremental, though. I do think companies realize that they need to have both the infrastructure for traditional IT and then have to really be thinking long-term as it pertains to how these things can improve business efficiencies. I know at Bonrian, we're finding ways to incorporate AI in our tools and the way that we do our business as well. We use AI to help us with due diligence, and we use AI to help our clients use our technology. So I think everybody should be thinking about it, because not only does it improve the user experience and improve business efficiencies, but it can save you money in the long run.
But also, one company that you have here on your list is AerCap Holdings. It's the world's largest aircraft leasing firm, if you're just looking at by fleet value. It also just hit a 52-week high just a couple days ago. I think it's an all-time high, really. Why do you like this company in this particular environment?
Well, we have the Boeing fiasco, which I think kind of makes people look for other areas where they can be taking advantage of, kind of the shortfall of Boeing. But it's also a really well-managed company trading at a massive discount to the market. So those two things, more than anything, are the reason why I like the stock. But, you can't overlook sort of market trends. I think you could argue that the Boeing situation doesn't necessarily affect them directly. But any kind of headline that would make people think about how airlines and fleets are managed, I think, is beneficial to AerCap.
Shane, I know in your career you've spent a lot of time on alternatives investing. What's the alternative that you think is most interesting these days that you're talking to your clients the most about?
Oh, man. So one of the things that has been coming up a lot lately is sports rights. It's one of my favorite topics because I think everybody out there can kind of connect with it. And we talk a lot about having advisors use alternatives as a way to connect with their target market of the types of clients that they want. And I think sports is, universally one of the ways to do that. And sports rights is becoming more and more common. I know Avenue Capital is launching a sports rights fund, and there are others like CAS Investments that have these accredited investor only, and I just want to preface that, opportunities in sports, but I'm seeing it more and more, and I think that's a really interesting play right now as you see, the Boston Celtics are being sold, and the multiple that they will get for that is going to be huge. And those opportunities are things that people pay attention to and connect with.
Hey, Shana, we really appreciate it. Thank you so much. Shana Sissel, President and CEO at Benrion Capital Market. So is that like everyone can get involved in sports rights?
I think if, certain funds, I think that will invest, and you can, be an investor in those funds. But again, I think as Shana was saying, the valuations, they just continue to go up and up and up. And, some people thought there might be a top with the struggles of some of these traditional media companies and the amounts they can pay for broadcast rights. But for every one of those media companies that's struggling, there's a technology company that's doing really well. And so whether it's, you can find these games on YouTube and Amazon Prime and all these other types of things.
And do the sports leagues makes the same?
What's
Whether
that?
or not
Yes.
Netflix is paying them versus
Yes.
like CBS, it's the same
Whoever
kind of
writes
money?
the check, yeah, and the check, the rights go right to the athletes in addition to the owners of the teams and everything like that.
Do I need to know anything about sports to be able to invest in sports?
No.
Hey, there we go.
There you go. Exactly. Right. So the money keeps going up, it seems like. So,
I like that. Yeah,
Yep.
apparently there was a soccer game over the weekend.
yes.
There were
There's a
two.
couple,
There were a couple, yeah. Cool. I'm into it. All right, you got the S&P is up by about 0.6%, sitting at another record high. Let's get to the world and national news right now. For that, we go to Michael Barr on this Monday. Michael.
Thank you very much, Alex, Paul, Lisa. A federal judge has dismissed the criminal case against Donald Trump, accusing him of mishandling classified information. According to Judge Eileen Cannon, the appointment of special counsel Jack Smith was unconstitutional. Smith may appeal the ruling. Meanwhile, former President Trump is calling for unity and resilience after an attempt on his life. His opponent, President Joe Biden, implored Americans to cool it down. The events over the weekend will change the way the Biden campaign is trying to revive itself. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has the story.
The campaign had begun to focus strongly on Trump's behavior, the ability to call him a potential dictator, and his second-term agenda. Now, even in his address to the nation, Biden called for a cool down and a different direction.
We debate and disagree. We compare and contrast the character of the candidates, the records, the issues, the agenda, the vision for America. But in America, we resolve our differences at the battle box.
His current president will have to be preaching unity. It also remains to be seen how Donald Trump will approach it. Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. Former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy says that he spoke with the former president shortly before Trump headed to Wisconsin, saying he was very excited for his RNC appearance.
Talked to President Trump today. He was in great spirits. I mean, he was telling me an unbelievable story about hearing the bullet actually come at him and go to his ear.
Former Speaker McCarthy spoke to ABC affiliate WISN's Matt Smith. The Copa America final devolved into chaos at Hard Rock Stadium in South Florida last night between Colombia and Argentina. Soccer fans broke through a gate outside the stadium, and many of the 7,000 people got in without tickets. Argentina won the game. Global news 24 hours a day whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
From the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. We're on Records Watch. Right now, we'll start with the NASDAQ up 0.9%, 168 points at 18,569. We have the S&P 500 up 0.6%, 34 points at 5,650. The Dow up 0.4%, 180 points at 40,181. We get to the two-year yield at 4.46%. That's up 1 basis point. The 10-year yield at 4.23%, up 4 basis points. We have the 30-year at 4.45%, and that's up 5 basis points. Want to get to currencies? Right now we have the dollar stronger, Japanese yen weaker at 157.93 against the dollar. We have the euro stronger, British pound weaker. Bitcoin up 4% at 62,978. To economic data, regional factory report issued by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. It signaled more weakness this month. Tomorrow, we go into retail sales for June. Wednesday, the Fed issues its Beige Book economic survey. Also this week, data on housing starts and industrial production. That is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Alex.
All right, thanks so much, Lisa Mateo. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news and analysis and business and economics through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence folks. They cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries worldwide. We also follow all the news for you also outside of Bloomberg. And joining us now is Henrietta Triss, Managing Partner and Director of Economic Policy. She joins us now. Okay, there is a lot to get through here. You cover all of this for Veda Partners. There's a lot to cherry pick from, but let's go to the breaking headline here. According to Fox News, and this was according to a post on X, President Trump will be making his vice president announcement today. Who do you think that's going to be?
Well, I think the base case should be J.D. Vance. Ohio is obviously a pretty safe red state right now, but I think the two of them have a mutually compatible outlook. It really suits the theme of his campaign, which is a very sort of robust, sort of aggressive America First campaign. The speculation, obviously, and the real exciting component would be if he were to choose Nikki Haley. Coming off of a 22% win in Indiana in the primaries just a couple weeks ago, she has shown that she has a real lock on a totally different demographic that Trump has struggled with for many years, and specifically in the last couple of months, which is the female demographic, specifically suburban, married, educated women. That would make his potential path to an electoral college win on par with Obama's in 2008 a real possibility.
So, Henrietta, on the VP pick, when do you think we're going to hear it? Who could it possibly be? Because that seems to be maybe at the top of the agenda here today.
Right. Yeah. So my understanding is it could happen as early as tonight, but I've seen quite a bit of speculation and rules changes within the RNC delegation and their committees that it could be as late as Wednesday. So while I recognize that the Trump team is saying that it could be tonight, I wouldn't be surprised if there were some fastballs thrown in here at the last minute. But my base case expectation is for J.D. Vance, and I'd be pretty alarmed and surprised if it were Nikki Haley. The difference between the two campaigns and internally within the Trump campaign, I think, is probably insurmountable, but it would be a very rational sort of strategic move for Trump to move to the middle and try to say, this really is a unity ticket. Let me show you how, and put Nikki Haley on the top.
If we go to J.D. Vance for a moment, what was striking, though, is how he really came out and was blaming Democrats for the assassination attempt on President Trump. What we've heard so far from former President Trump is more of a message of unity. Do you think that the unity message prevails here on the ticket, or do you think that the fracturing prevails on the ticket?
I think fracturing is where Trump feels most comfortable. I think he likes being, sort of the aggressor, and a unity ticket is not in keeping with anything we've seen from the Trump campaign since 2016. So I'd be pretty surprised if it were Nikki Haley. Again, I do think that makes the most political sense for him, just in terms of trying to win the Electoral College and winning the popular vote as well, which could be massively helpful to him in 2025 as Republicans try to pass a $4.6 trillion tax bill. So there is a lot of strategic benefit to choosing a Nikki Haley. I don't know if it's compatible with his actual campaign, though, and my default is going to be a J.D. Vance style candidate. Marco Rubio is another one I'd put up there in roughly the same category.
So, Henry, what do you think or let's put it this way, do you think the message from former President Trump and his campaign, will it change at all given the events of Saturday?
I think the agenda of the campaign and the campaign in general needs to just get through the next couple of months. We are, in the very early days in July. I mean, this should be something that we are expecting as a shakeup in October, and it's only July. We've had two massive shakeups in just the last week, with the disastrous presidential debate for Joe Biden and the dramatic rise we've seen in calls for Biden to get off the ticket, and then an assassination attempt. So from my seat, there's a lot of whiplash, and we still have 4 months to go till actual election day.
Part of the Biden campaign has truly been talking about how President Trump will fracture democracy and what a big risk is. Do you think the Biden campaign can continue with that now? They've already pulled some campaign ads. How does that narrative evolve?
No, I don't think that that's going to hold. The idea of staying as a unity ticket, suspending campaign donations, suspending fundraising, suspending ads, that's all going to wrap up, I think, in the next couple of hours. You're already seeing some policy papers come out from the White House. There was one released just moments ago on the impact of Trump's potential tariffs and replacing the federal income tax with tariffs, which would drive tariffs up. It would have to be 70% or higher in order to compensate for the lost revenue to Treasury if they were to abolish the federal income tax. So there's stuff percolating behind the scenes. And then let's be mindful that the Biden team is really trying to beat back the base of the Democratic Party that's hoping he will step aside. So a whole bunch of things went in Biden's favor, ironically, since the shooting. And it is really just that it has taken Democratic concerns about his ability to run for another 4 years off the table. I think that's only temporary. In the background, you still have calls from members of the DNC and from donors to either suspend donations, not continue contributing to the campaign, and to move forward with something akin to a mini primary in late July. So all that is percolating in the background, and I think Biden's going to have to go out in force. The one area he really succeeds in beating Republican messaging on, aside from things along the lines of abortion, is really who has the better state of play with regards to maintaining democracy. He pulls ahead of Trump by 7 points there. We'll really want to watch and see how that plays with voters in the wake of Saturday's shooting.
So when do you think the Democrats will make any kind of moves as it relates to their candidate, if at all, here? Is this something that they have to just see how the recent news of the failed assassination, how that plays out in the public's mind, maybe get some polling? What's the timing there, do you think?
Yeah, and because we had a tremendous amount of polling. I mean, everybody was interested in seeing how Biden and Trump would fare in the wake of the disastrous debate and in the uproar about Democrats potentially replacing Biden. That has all taken a backseat. I don't think it's going to go away, though. And there are, I think, the view in the Democratic Party with everybody that's not, Team Biden is really that Republicans are on a trajectory to win right now. And if Biden stays at the top of the ticket, Democrats could get wiped out in the House and the Senate and give Republicans not just a statistical majority, but a mandate level majority, 55, 56, 57 seats in the Senate. So I think there's a tremendous amount of focus in the background of getting Biden to step aside. 60% or more of Democratic voters want someone else at the top of the ticket. They're going to need to shake things up. I don't think that that's going to go away.
About 30, 40 seconds left. The Trump trade is in full effect right now in the market. Is that legit for the long term?
Absolutely. I mean, at this point, the Democrats have a candidate that 62% of Democrats would prefer were not on the ballot. In that scenario, coupled with the resurgence and massive galvanization of Trump voters, you really need to have another shakeup at the Democratic front in order for this not to be a Republican win election. The two are neck and neck nationally, but Trump leads by 4 or 5 points in most of the swing states, and that's how you get elected in the Electoral College.
All right, Henrietta, thank you so much. We do appreciate you. I know it's been a busy 72 hours for you. Henrietta Treyes, Managing Partner and Director of Economic Policy over at Beta Partners. And I know this is like a very small microcosm here, but we talk a lot about Bitcoin and the prison stocks and stuff, but solar stocks really getting hit. The idea, of course, is that if President Trump wins the White House, we'll get mandates to go away when it comes to solar stuff. You have to wonder, is that a good bet?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, we're starting to see people make the Trump bet here.
Yeah, the really specific bets, too, which is quite interesting. This is Bloomberg.
your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
For the Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio, I'm Lisa Mateo. Big bank reporting season rolls on. Shares of Goldman Sachs higher, up more than 1%. And this is after reporting a surge in earnings in the second quarter. We have more from Bloomberg's Sonali Bosick.
You have trading beating expectations on fixed income by a landslide, and equity trading as well, not only beating expectations, but coming in over where JP Morgan came in just last week, as well as over where Morgan Stanley is expected to come in tomorrow.
Bank of America also reports tomorrow. BlackRock hit a $10.6 trillion asset record. Investors added $83 billion to ETFs and $35 billion to fixed income overall. BlackRock shares, they're up about 0.3%. Apple shares are higher. This is off the back of big sales boost in India. Bloomberg's Jess Menton explains.
Morgan Stanley actually named it as a top pick on its AI platform, but of course, Apple's India sales surged 33% to record as this China shift is persisting. So Apple's annual sales in India did hit that record of almost $8 billion.
Apple up nearly 2%. And sources say Google parent Alphabet in talks to acquire cybersecurity startup Wiz for as much as $23 billion. Now, if completed, it would be Alphabet's largest acquisition to date. Right now, Alphabet up more than 1%. Macy's ended talks with Ark House Management, Brigade Capital Management on that buyout proposal. The company said its board, well, it concluded further talks. They were not in its best interest. Macy's now going to turn its focus to turning around the company through a standalone operating plan. That news has shares tanking right now, down about 13%. Burberry said its first quarter performance for 2025 was, quote, disappointing. It suspended its dividend. The company also replaced its CEO. Its shares are lower this morning, down 15%. And Swatch also down about 9%.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, happy Monday, everybody. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. Welcome to Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We cover all the top news in economics, politics, and finance through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence analysts. They cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries worldwide. We also talk about world and national news. And for that, we go to Michael Barr. Michael.
Thank you very much, Alex. Paul, Lisa, a federal judge has dismissed the criminal case against Donald Trump that accused him of mishandling classified information, saying the appointment of Special Counsel Jack Smith was unconstitutional. U.S. District Judge Eileen Cannon's order ends one of the 4 criminal cases against Trump as he ramps up his campaign for another term in the White House. We get reaction from Bloomberg's Joe Matthew at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee.
This was supposed to be the slam dunk case, according to a lot of the legal minds who looked at the 4 cases against Donald Trump. But of course, we knew that this was not going to come until after the election, and it's one that had slowed down quite a bit here. But you're right, the timing on this first day of the Republican National Convention following the events of this past weekend, but also a string of legal victories for Donald Trump, considering the Supreme Court's immunity ruling, the delay of his sentencing in the New York trial. Even though he was, of course, found guilty on those 34 counts, didn't make a dent in his polling, and it's remarkable to have another layer of good news for the former president.
Bloomberg's Joe Matthew at the RNC in Milwaukee. The convention starts at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. The head of Homeland Security says it is unequivocally false that his department rebuffed multiple attempts from Donald Trump's security detail to increase protective resources in the weeks before the attempted assassination at the Trump rally in Pennsylvania Saturday. Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas also responded to criticism from security experts.
A direct line of sight like that to the former president should not occur. That is precisely why President Biden directed that an independent review of the incident occur.
Secretary Mayorkas spoke on ABC's Good Morning America. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he is not afraid of a potential second Donald Trump presidency. It comes, as he said, the turbulence around the U.S. election is hurting Kyiv's effort on the battlefield. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Alex and Paul.
All right, thank you so much, Michael Barr. So here's a fascinating article from Bloomberg. It's reading quite high. It says, Amazon sold a used diaper, and it tanked a mom-and-pop business. So this concerns Paul and Rochelle Barron. They were one of the Amazon success stories. They sold waterproof diapers for swim. You need it, you like it, you want it. Apparently, some customer got a used diaper, and then they gave a 1-star review on Amazon, and has now, in essence, tanked their business because that post is still up there.
And the question is who's at fault there? And presumably it's Amazon.
Right.
Because the product came back. Michael Barr loves this story.
Michael Barr is literally losing it right now in the radio room.
A used diaper got sold.
Yes.
Yeah, but the question becomes, like, how does something like that happen? So apparently selling returned products is a new thing on Amazon, right? And it's a big problem. And the people at Amazon are told to work pretty quickly, and they don't always have the time to carefully inspect each item before they put it back into circulation. This is according to someone who used to run that operation. And apparently this happened to this small company, and they protested it with Amazon, said it was their fault, and the review's still up there, and it's really hurting them.
I apologize for the way I'm going to say this, but I got to quote my father. That's a damn shame, man.
I mean, yes, also you have to wonder, like, who would return a dirty diaper, but, like, let's put that one aside for a second. And there was another, I guess, another customer who had an issue with a diaper, but emailed the people directly, and they sent them a replacement. So, like, no harm, no foul. Right. However, big harm, big foul when it comes to that review.
Because this company was really successful. They're doing great. They're on Rachel Ray. They're being featured in Forbes. Is kind of like, this is what can happen. A good business can come up out of a new idea, and Amazon can help you get really big, but they can also be, I guess, part of
the problem, I guess, in some ways, or like the issues or a hurdle you have to manage.
Yep.
So Michael Barr, you good now? You good?
Yeah.
He's good? Because I didn't think he was going to make it there for a second. All right, much more coming up the next hour of Bloomberg Intelligence. We're going to be talking to Sylvia Jablonski, CEO and CIO of Defiance ETFs, and Allison Williams will be breaking down Goldman Sachs earnings and what's going on with the stock, the good and the bad when it comes to parsing through some of those numbers. This is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney.
The real outperformance has been the U.S. corporate high yield.
Are the companies lean enough? Have they trimmed all the fat?
The semiconductor business is a really cyclical business.
Breaking market headlines and corporate news from across the globe.
Do investors like the M&A that we've seen?
These are two big-time blue-chip companies.
The window between the peak and cut changing super fast.
Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, coming up in this hour, we're going to check in with Celia Motion, Bloomberg Washington senior correspondent, on the Big Take podcast entitled "The Trump Assassination Attempt Already Reshaped the Election." So we'll get that reporting there. Sylvia Jablonski, CEO and CIO of Defiance ETFs, we'll get her market call. Then Allison Williams, she's going to break down some of these Goldman Sachs earnings numbers. Stock pretty much unchanged here. The traders came through pretty well. Bankers continue to have some headwinds out there, so we'll break it all down with Allison Williams. But first, let's go to Charlie Pellet and get a Bloomberg Business Flash. Charlie.
Thank you very much, Paul Sweeney. Back to work Monday. We have got stocks trading at records. S&P could see its 38th record so far this year. Here's where we stand right now. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all rallying. Let's throw in the Russell 2000. As a matter of fact, that is the outperformer right now. The Russell 2000 up 1.6%. The Dow up 268, up 0.7%. S&P up 44 now, a gain of 0.8%. While the NASDAQ Composite Index is advancing. Right now, we've got NASDAQ up 200, a gain of 1.1%. 10-year, 4.21%. The 2-year, 4.44%. The 30-year, 4.43%. Spot gold up 0.9%, 24.32 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude down 0.5%, 81.84 for a barrel of WTI. Bottom line here, stocks at records, global markets ramping up the so-called Trump trade after this weekend's rally attack. What about markets and the election? Peter Cheer is head of macro strategy at Academy Securities.
I think we're too far away from the election to be betting too much of your positioning on the election. For me, everyone's decided that Trump's worse for deficits than Biden might be. I'm not so sure. I think both are going to be very bad for deficits, so I don't get too worried about that trade. And if you look even just what happened in Mexico recently, peso sold off. There was going to be all sorts of change. So far, there hasn't been much change. The peso's coming back down. So I think we have to get through. There's going to be a lot of rhetoric. There's going to be a lot of campaign promises. What can actually get done?
You can hear more of that conversation on the Bloomberg Surveillance podcast. You can download it wherever you get your podcasts. Global markets so higher across the board, and shares of Donald Trump's media company surging after that failed weekend assassination attempt. Right now, shares of DJT, Trump Media and Technology, they are up by 34.4%. Again, recapping, stocks higher, S&P up 44, a gain of 0.8%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. Alex Steele here alongside Paul Sweeney. And just to keep pounding the table here, Russell 2000 is up by 1.6%. A real rally today, just around 10 o'clock. It's like a straight arrow up. Let's get some details here on some of the stocks that are also moving. Norma Linda joins us from Bloomberg News. You have Tesla on the list. What's happening here?
Yeah, so Tesla is actually one of the biggest gainers by percentage in the S&P 500 this morning. And this is coming after, back in the geopolitical space, Elon Musk endorsed former President Donald Trump for the presidency in late November. We are seeing shares of Tesla jumping as much as 7%. Now, this is really interesting because it's recouping its losses that we saw from last Thursday. Of course, last Thursday, we did hear that the company announced that the highly anticipated robo-taxi unveiling that was scheduled for early August would be delayed by 2 months. So this is, of course, some welcome news for investors to see the stock rallying higher. And of course, we do know that Elon wasn't the only billionaire to endorse Trump over the weekend. We also had Bill Ackman doing the same. But Elon's endorsement in particular has helped to ease some concerns that a Trump presidency could weigh on EV demand.
Stock, since that, late April low,
It's amazing.
70%.
Yeah.
So it's had a great rebound there.
Definitely seeing a comeback here.
All right, Goldman Sachs.
Yes.
We're going to touch on this later with Allison Williams, but walk us through what the stock's doing right now.
Yeah, so we're seeing financials as the second best performing group in the S&P 500. And of course, a lot of the conversation has really been around Goldman Sachs. We are seeing shares actually hitting their highest level on record right now, up as much as 2.3%. And as we do know earlier, we were seeing shares fluctuating. So we are seeing it on the upward swing right now. This has really been in focus, especially as the company said that it saw a surge in profit, particularly pointing toward the fixed income and equity trading departments that helped drive better than expected results. But on the downward side, of course, as we spoke about earlier, the CFO did say that it has plans to moderate the pace of share buybacks. So we are seeing investors weighing both of these things, but it does seem as though the positivity is outweighing the downside.
And you know what I haven't heard recently? Any funky noise, news about David Solomon, the CEO. And to me, no news is good news. Stock setting all-time highs. I think he's weathered that little storm, I guess, which was both external and internal, with some internal concerns there about, how the disposition of the private bank, I'm not the private bank, the retail bank.
Yeah, most definitely.
Again, stock hitting all-time highs today.
And also, remember, he got so much heat for DJing, and there was all that drama, and he hated talking about it, but then he'd show up in the Hamptons and DJ, and there was the COVID restrictions. It was all of that. That definitely is non-existent. I don't think he really DJs anymore because of that.
Not that I've heard of.
Anyway, Macy's also.
Yes, so looking at a retail name, we are seeing a double-digit drop this morning. We have shares plunging as much as 16%. Now, this is the worst day in 4 years. This is, of course, after Macy's unanimously decided to end talks with PE firms looking at Ark House and Brigade, who were looking to come in and save the company. Macy's said that the buyout offer that they received wasn't, quote, an actionable proposal because it didn't have sufficient financing. We, of course, have Nordstrom and Kohl's falling in sympathy.
Either of you shop at Macy's?
I haven't been there in quite a while, but to your point, I'm a sales kind of girl. Bloomingdale's?
Yeah. Okay. So Bloomingdale's is owned by Macy's.
Okay.
Among other brands. So I will definitely stop at Bloomingdale's, but I have not in a very long time. Why? Do you want to know?
Why?
Please.
Not enough sales.
Not enough
See,
sales.
I mean, you're 40% off. I don't think so.
Looking
There
for the
was a
sales
time
rack.
where there was 70%, 80%. It was some serious sales. There was buy more, save more with the sales. It was good. It's not good anymore.
It's not looking too
No,
nice.
right? Before we let you go, what are you guys talking about on the desk in terms of the rotation trade, the value growth? Morgan Stanley had an interesting note out as we all contemplate small caps, saying that it's small cap growth that's doing well, not small cap value. So even within that value trade, there's still a growth trade.
Yeah, I think that's really been something that's been in focus today, especially as we are seeing the Russell outperforming right now. So, I think the conversation has really been around how is the strength of small caps going to be moving forward, especially as you put that against, of course, a lot of those growth names. We are seeing, of course, outperformance when we look at those tech names, but to see the strength in growth in small caps specifically is a really remarkable thing.
All right, very good. Norma Linda, thank you so much for joining us. Norma Linda covers all the markets for Bloomberg News. I want to get right to our next story, the big take story. Bold and bloody Trump seizes the moment after being shot. That's the headline to get your attention. Celia Mosin joins us here, Washington senior correspondent for Bloomberg News, joining us via Zoom here. So Celia, the big take story here, the podcast you have, how does the news from the weekend, the failed assassination attempt, how does that change this presidential election? What's some of the early thoughts there?
Yeah, I don't want to underestimate how long it's taking people to process what is happening, as we can see from the scrutiny on the Secret Service. But this has definitely become a game changer. The events on Saturday night, the attempted assassination, it's changed the calculus for both campaigns. The Biden campaign is now pulling down ads, at least temporarily, all campaign ads. A lot of those ads had Biden's voice saying that Trump was a danger to democracy, and he is going to have to change that approach. Now, that approach is what polling suggested got the most attention, got the most zingers, and the most emotion from voters who are already apathetic about going to the polls and picking a candidate, particularly between these two men who have already served the country as president. On the Trump campaign side, we're just wondering whether Trump is going to swing toward calls for unity and echo Biden's own comments and comments from within his own parties. House Speaker Mike Johnson yesterday posted on X that he is calling for unity. We need to lower the temperature in the nation. Or is Trump going to use this moment to sow more discontent, and possibly we might see even more political violence coming up?
Yeah, that was so interesting when we had a Fox News reporter, I think, putting a post on X saying that he's going to pick a VP today. It's interesting to see then how he picks that VP, right? Like J.D. Vance has already been out talking about how it's the Democrats' fault. It's President Biden's fault, this assassination attempt, right? That's not unity. That's a lot of polarization versus what we've heard from some of the Democrats, which feels much more unifying. Do you think the VP pick is going to go into that? Are you going to help decide that campaign, unity or not?
I don't know if we should look at it as this binary choice. I will say that what we're seeing from folks like J.D. Vance and Republicans and MAGA Republicans who are picking up that line that this is Biden's fault. One, it's a argument that should be examined with merit, but also they are mirroring what Democrats did that January 6th. Yes, it was a very different situation. Trump responded very differently at that time, but they are kind of trying to do this tit for tat with Democrats that you blamed that on Trump, so we're going to blame this on Biden. I think it will be very interesting to see. I mean, Trump's presumably his speech for the RNC convention on Thursday night was probably already written or drafted at least. I'm assuming that it has been torn up and is now going to, he's going to have some very different words to offer. But I am very curious to see in this moment, you're right, in this moment, we will be wondering if he does or doesn't pick someone like J.D. Vance, who so recently made those comments that might indicate where Trump is headed.
Celia, I guess a lot of folks are trying to gauge to what extent, if at all, this event, this near-death experience on Saturday, will change former President Trump, maybe his actions, his rhetoric, his thinking. Is there any feeling within D.C. that has happened or will happen?
There are signs. You know, the Washington Examiner reported that President Trump has torn up his speech that he had already drafted for Thursday and is now looking for words that will call for unity. This could be a trial balloon. This could be just a test to take the temperature of others in the party and voters themselves to see, is this what his constituents and his base wants? He often tells them, but he really does listen to his base. This is not a candidate who has gotten this far by having focus groups in pristine two-way mirror rooms. He wets his finger, sticks in the air, and sees what is he able to hear from his base when he throws out different ideas. So let's see. I mean, Thursday's speech will be a much awaited event.
when we talk about who decides the election, the never Trumpers will still be never Trumpers. The pro Trumpers will still be pro Trumpers. Like, that's not going to change any of this, right? Does it change the 6% of voters in the 6 swing states? Does it change that? How do we measure that?
That's such a good question. I'm wondering that myself, if there will be sympathy votes for Trump, pushing people out the door to go and then vote for Trump, or if any of his current supporters who thought, oh, this is a shoo-in for him, I don't even need to go vote, maybe they will now see it as an act of patriotism to go and support this man who was seen with blood dripping down his face, the American flag behind him, and he's pumping his fist in the air saying he's going to continue to fight. It's a little too soon. You have to wonder, is that feeling that has been stirred from Saturday night's events going to remain in a couple of months? We're still far out from Election Day.
Soleil, I guess the news of the weekend, the failed assassination attempt, if nothing else, it's taken the Democratic Party and its discussion about who its candidate will be. Will it be President Biden or someone else? That's taken that out of the news cycle, it seems, or put it on the back burner. What's the feeling in D.C. as to how the Democrats will approach that issue, which is still out there?
Oh, that is one big matzo ball hanging out there. I just don't know. I mean, for 2 weeks, we were squarely, intently focused on Biden and his candidacy and his mental acuity. That has been knocked out of headlines. It's been knocked out of our psyche here in Washington. We're not discussing that. We were all wondering what was going to happen at this Lester Holt interview that's going to air this evening with Biden. Is he going to mistake Trump for Kamala? Is he going to mistake Putin for Zelensky again? But now he has reformulated his goal with that interview to talk about unity.
What else are you guys working on as you kind of go through the next steps, which is completely uncharted territory? How do you report this out?
This is uncharted because we're in the age of social media and this has happened. We're looking at history. There have been other assassinations and attempts on national leaders, not just current and former and presidential hopefuls, but also big leaders. I'm thinking of MLK. We're looking at some of those examples and how those acts of political violence have shaped the conversation and events as they unfolded. There's a lot of scrutiny right now in Washington on the Secret Service. We are awaiting Department of Homeland Security head Alexander Mayorkas. He is expected to be in the White House press briefing room today. A lot of Republicans and Republican donors, famously Elon Musk, have called for the director of the Secret Service to step down. Is this seen as something that shows that they were not adequately prepared? One thing to remember, though, is that President Trump has, for many years now, been a big supporter of the Secret Service. He has a lot of loyalty or emotion for these men who will throw their bodies in front of a bullet that's coming at Trump. He was saved. There was no other attempt. The suspected shooter on Saturday night was immediately killed, actually right on scene, so he wasn't able to harm anyone further. But you do have to wonder, why was he allowed on a rooftop so close to the outside perimeter of where the former president and presidential hopeful was speaking? That is something that we were watching very, very closely here in Washington.
So, Soleil, I guess just finally, the VP selection, do we have any sense of when that's going to happen? I guess there was some early reporting this morning that perhaps it could be as soon as today, but maybe not till Wednesday. Are you hearing anything?
No, I mean, I've seen the same Fox News report that you've seen, that the announcement could come today. Trump apparently had picked that person last week. And it was such close hold that I had sources who were with him in Mar-a-Lago last Tuesday night saying, Soleil, I asked him, I danced around it. I tried to get any kind of tea leaf reading. Do you like beards or no beards? Thinking of JD Vance. And he had such a poker face. And so I really think very few people, I think it's maybe 2 or 3 people outside of Trump, know who his choice is. I don't know if he changed his mind after what happened on Saturday about who that person should be. I don't even know if that person knows, because a couple of the choices are senators, and oh boy, is Capitol Hill leaky.
Great stuff. Really good reporting. It's a wonderful piece. You can find and hear more stories like this from Bloomberg Big Take on Bloomberg at thebloomberg.com/Big Take. You can also listen and follow the Big Take on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much, Saleha Mohsin, Bloomberg Washington senior correspondent, joining us. Well, all I can say is there are definitely going to be fireworks over the next 4 days. I mean, talk about parsing every word, every look, every moment. And again, I go back to the markets, right? Our bread and butter, and obviously the Trump trade in effect, right? You have prison stocks up, solar stocks down, Bitcoin up. You have gold near a record high. This curve is steepening. Is that a sustainable way to operate? Do you sustainably move into a portfolio and hold on to it based on a potential President Trump win? Anyway, we're going to break all that down. All right, coming up next, Sylvia Jablonski will be joining us, CEO of Defiance ETFs.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got stocks trading at records, highs of the morning right now. The Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ 100 index, and the Russell 2000 all advancing. We begin with the Russell 2000 index of small cap shares, by far the outperformer, up now by 2.1%. To put that in context, the S&P 500 index had a record up 50, a gain of 0.9%. Dow Industrials up 296 for the Dow, a gain right now of 0.7%. NASDAQ up 238, an advance there of 1.3%. 10-year 4.21%, the 2-year 4.44%, and the 30 also at 4.44%. Spot gold is advancing by 1%, up $23 the ounce to $24.34, while West Texas Intermediate crude oil down 0.2%, 82.04 a barrel. Global markets ramping up the Trump trade after the weekend rally attack. Shares of Trump Media and Technology Group, which trades under the ticker DJT, it debuted earlier this year. That stock up now by 32%. Other stocks seen as benefiting from the Republican winning another term, from private prison groups to gun makers, are also higher. Shares of Geo Group, a private prison operator, up by 9.8%. Also higher, Core Civic up by 9%. And among some of the gun names, Smith & Wesson brands surging 10.6%, and Sturm Ruger up now by 6.9%. Recapping, U.S. stocks are rallying. S&P up 50, a gain now of 0.9%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pelleton, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney, we are live here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. We're streaming live on YouTube as well. So head over to youtube.com and search Bloomberg Podcast. A lot of things that this market's trying to digest right here. And most recently, the domestic politics, the Fed assassination attempt of former President Trump. We've got global geopolitics still out there. We've got earnings. We're right smack in the middle of earnings season. And then we've got the ever-present Fed watch. What is an investor to do? Let's check in with professional. Sylvia Jablonski, Chief Executive Officer and Chief Investment Officer at Defiance ETFs, joins us here. Sylvia, we come into the markets here on a Monday morning. Another key issue out there in terms of domestic politics, what it means for these markets. How did you layer in what we learned over the weekend to what was already a challenging process for investors?
Good morning. Great to be here with you today. Well, I think this weekend was a shock to many, and I think it's somewhat unsurprising that the market is rallying today off of what happened. I think that there's some sentiment in the market that perhaps this turns out to be a Republican favored win. And, if that's the case, if you think about kind of like big corporations and things that benefit from them or benefit them, things like policies for lower taxes and, less kind of regulation, more M&A activity, this tends to be positive for some of the Mag 7 types of firms and things like this. But I think the other side of it, though, is I do think that we need to be a little bit cautious and see what happens in the market in coming days. The other way that this could have gone is that, we could have seen a lot of volatility in the markets, which I did and will expect to see in coming months if the election kind of goes back to he said, she said, he did, he didn't do, versus let's unite. I think if it's kind of a united front type of election, you get more stability in the markets. If you don't, you're going to see a lot of that volatility, and it'll be interesting to see at that point where asset allocations go.
It is really interesting to see the VIX curve, for example. Like, it hasn't really moved upwards. Like, we do get that spike in the VIX if you look at your function CCRV right around the election, but it hasn't really re-rated in the last couple days. Sylvia, the other thing that feels irrespective of what's happening in D.C. is this massive Russell 2000 rally. Multiple choice question. Is it short covering? Yeah. Do you fade it or do you buy it?
I think there's an argument here to buy Russell, to start dipping into small caps, just for the sake of the fact that the Fed is very likely to start cutting. The data is arguably more favorable than not in terms of inflation going down. We've heard Fed Chair Powell talk about it. We've heard a lot of the Fed, governors come on and talk about, their views that we're finally going in the right direction. They need more data and things like this, but overall rates coming down is probably going to be good for small caps. It could be some short covering, but that also comes because of the fact that, rate cuts are likely to come forward. So I do think that you're going to see some of that diversification into areas of the market that haven't performed as well as the Mag 7. So that's also the natural inclination, I think, of longer-term investors. You have these huge gains on some of the large cap names. Maybe you hang out with those, but you put some of your extra cash to work in places like small caps. And then I would argue, after this weekend, Bitcoin, right, we see the rally there. Digital assets and crypto had a good fall, good pullback, good dip to buy on. And so that might be part of the diversification trade too.
Sylvia, we're just kind of getting into the teeth of this earnings cycle here. What are you looking for this time around?
I'm looking for the same thing I was last time around. Overall, it would certainly be good to see that 10% growth that's estimated out there for S&P 500 earnings growth. But the truth is, I think we're all going to be looking for Mag 7. What is NVIDIA going to do, or will they continue to do what they've been doing all along? What will Apple look like with some of the positive news we've seen about demand picking up? Will those 7 hang tight and continue leading? And I think that's what a lot of what the market wants to continue to see this year. What would be healthier for the market is if we saw broad diversification in earnings growth and broad participation across the market. But I think that overall sentiment right now is still really heavily linked to the Mag 7.
Going back to the Bitcoin comment that you said, I don't get the Bitcoin trade with President Trump. Like, go ahead and buy Bitcoin, sure. Like, safety trade, okay, fine. Like, gold's at a record high or near a record high, why not? But what's the specific link to President Trump here?
Well, he's crypto friendly, right? He's thought to be crypto friendly anyway. In recent times, he's been, a little bit more favorable, or at least less doubtful about the viability of crypto as an asset. And so, I think that there's this idea that because he's a potentially crypto favorable president, that policies will kind of support or at least not diminish the growth of crypto. And that being said, I think, MicroStrategy is actually one of my buys too. I think, with crypto falling as much as it has because of the split, because of the, German government offloading positions, you have a real good dip there. And that's part of the rally too. But notably, crypto rose over the weekend. So you have to think that there's a link, due to his kind of favorable opinion about digital currency investing.
Yeah. Well, I also have to wonder, Paul, too, if it's just a deregulation environment for sure. Deregulation all the way if President Trump wins. We've already seen that with the courts.
Right, exactly. So, Sylvia, valuation here. Boy, if I look at valuation, just the surface for the S&P 500, it feels maybe not frothy, but certainly expensive. Now, some folks say, well, hey, pull out the handful of stocks that are really driving that, and the market's not that expensive. How do you kind of pursue that?
Yeah, I agree with that latter comment. Pull out some of the top names, and actually it doesn't look so frothy. But I would even argue that even for some of the top names out there, if you look at companies like NVIDIA, for example, that have just skyrocketed in terms of stock performance, they're certainly justifying their valuation, right? I mean, earnings have been positive. A lot of these corporations have cut massive spending and costs over the last couple of years. They're running leaner and meaner. They're more efficient. Or top and bottom line earnings are coming in. The valuations for now, to me, have been justified, and they wouldn't keep me from investing in these stocks going forward. Particularly when you get market pullbacks. When you get a couple of days ago, Nasdaq fell over 2%. Things like that. I mean, those are good times to enter into the market, particularly if you're a longer term shareholder. I'm not opposed to getting in, but there are opportunities outside of the Mag 7, the companies that do have the higher valuations too. So when you hear things like small cap rallying, and also, other parts of the AI trade, like energy and uranium, copper, things like this, that there are other areas of the market to participate in what the Mag 7 are doing.
Well, it's interesting, we talk about a rotation though, right? Like out of growth into value, but both are moving. Like you have growth, the Mag 7, you have the NASDAQ, NASDAQ 100, the S&P, and you also have the Russell. Can you have all these things at once? Like what does this tell us about where we are?
Well, that tells us, in my mind, that tells us that, we're in a soft landing, and that, the market is a good place to be. And so for all of the investors that have that $6 trillion of cash that they're sitting on in their 4 to 5%, different fixed income types of products, money markets, treasuries, things like this. When you have an S&P 500 and NASDAQ that are returning double digits, and we do have this sense of a soft landing, we have rates coming down, election years tend to be favorable for stocks. I think you're going to see participation across the markets. There will be those who favor momentum in the Mag 7, and there will be those who strategically diversify and have wider market breadth exposure. And I think that both of those things are happening because we are seeing that inflation coming down, that soft landing, and that's what markets want, and that's the sweet spot right now. Not to say that volatility isn't going to come our way, but I do think that at this moment we're in that soft landing sweet spot.
All right, Sylvia, thank you so much for joining us. Sylvia Jablonski, Chief Executive Officer and Chief Investment Officer at Defiance ETFs. So look at the markets. Again, another strong day here for the markets. S&P up 0.7%. And again, Alex, as you've been pointing out, the Russell up 1.9%. So that's kind of where the juice is. Goldman Sachs, they put out some numbers this morning. Stocks up 1% today, all-time high for our friends at Goldman Sachs. We're going to check in coming up with Allison Williams. She covers all the big banks, the investment banks for Bloomberg Intelligence. She's been doing that for decades. She knows what she's doing. So we'll check in on those Goldman Sachs earnings coming up. But first, with our news in New York City.
Thank you very much, Paul, Alex, and Charlie. It's a big legal victory for Donald Trump. A federal judge has dismissed the criminal case against the former president that accused him of mishandling classified information, saying the appointment of special counsel Jack Smith was unconstitutional. U.S. District Judge Eileen Cannon's order ends one of the 4 criminal cases against Trump as he ramps up his campaign for another term in the White House. Bloomberg's Jody Schneider.
It's one of the 4 criminal cases brought against Donald Trump. We didn't expect it to probably go to trial this year, but the fact that it's being thrown out is another really big plus for the former president, and especially as he ramps up his campaign. This throwing it out means they'll have to start, over again. They basically said that Jack Smith was unconstitutionally appointed, and we don't have a whole lot more comment than that.
Bloomberg's Jody Snyder is at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. In the wake of the weekend assassination attempt to former President Trump, one of his political rivals will now speak at the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. Former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley is slated to give a speech as Republicans call for unity following the shooting of Trump. Also at the RNC is former House Speaker Kevin McCarthy. McCarthy says that he spoke with the former president shortly before Donald Trump headed to Wisconsin.
He's upbeat. He's excited about coming to Milwaukee. He was going to get on the plane right before I talked to him. And so I think it's going to be an exciting week for all.
Former Speaker McCarthy spoke to ABC affiliate WISN's Matt Smith. Jury deliberations continue today in the bribery trial against Senator Bob Menendez. The New Jersey Democrat is accused of taking bribes from 3 businessmen, including gold bars. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with the Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
It's 11:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ all advancing. A Monday rally underway. All major equity indexes gaining. S&P set for its 38th record this year. Do want to begin, though, with the Russell 2000 surging now by 2%. To put that in context, the S&P is up 0.8%. S&P up 44 right now at 56.59. We are looking at a record not only for the S&P. We've got the Dow up 300 points now, a gain of 0.7%. NASDAQ up 197, a gain there of 1.1%. Stocks are hitting records as calls about heightened market volatility failed to materialize after Donald Trump's assassination attack over the weekend bolstered his chances of taking over the White House. 10-year, 4.21%. The 2-year, 4.43%. The 30-year, also at 4.43%. Gold up $22 the ounce, up 0.9%, while West Texas Intermediate crude is down 0.1%, 82.10 for a barrel of WTI. Another round of lackluster data may be in the cards when retail sales is released tomorrow. And with a look ahead, here's Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
May retail sales eked out a 0.1% increase after falling in April. June doesn't look much better. Auto industry data shows sales slowed. Inflation remains an issue. Unemployment is up, and there's evidence credit card delinquencies are mounting. Meantime, a regional factory report issued today by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York signals more weakness this month. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
On a day when stocks are surging to records, Macy's is a notable exception. Macy's shares are plunging 13.2%. Macy's has ended talks with Ark House Management and Brigade Capital Management on their revised buyout offer for the department store chain. Again, Macy's down now by 13.2%. Recapping, S&P up 42, a gain of 0.7%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, thank you so much, Charlie Pellet. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business, economics, and finance through our lens of our Bloomberg Intelligence analysts, because they cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries worldwide. And we're going to check in with one of them now on Goldman Sachs, sitting at a record high. And this was all thanks to the traditional old school Goldman Sachs business, FICC and equity trading, just crushing analyst estimates. For that, we want to go to Allison Williams, Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Analyst for Global Banks and Asset Managers. Allison, the highlights, and is it worth the record high on Goldman Sachs stock? That is hard. That is hard to say.
Well, as you know, we don't make stock calls, but I can tell you that the fundamentals are strong, and Goldman is really, showing that it made the right decision in the last couple of years to focus back on its core institutional businesses. Out of all the global banks, they have been the most focused on this business. They earn the most from trading, and they're definitely showing progress in different aspects of the business that they've focused on. So, for example, fixed income trading up 15 to 20%, doing a lot of financing assets in that business. Equity trading also up strong. The one area that was a little bit weak was the M&A fee side. They are typically the global leader in fees, but JP Morgan really sort of leapfrogging them this quarter. But the positive thing is that they talked about the investment banking fee pipeline increasing sequentially. That looks good for the third quarter. On the expense side of things, also showing some good cost control on the non-compensation expenses, but on the compensation expenses, the ratio there actually going up a little bit.
Ah, interesting. Okay. Allison, what kind of returns do the Goldman Sachs's of the world earn on their, their global trading businesses today? I know that, with coming out of the great financial crisis, lots of regulations, lots of limits. Where is Goldman and some of their big peers?
So certainly, the returns are not what they used to be, and it depends on the specific vertical. I think if you look at fixed income trading, it tends to have sort of a higher pre-tax margin, but the returns on equity tend to be lower because it's a little bit capital intensive. But for the bank overall, turning in double-digit returns, so I think showing a good return overall.
Do you think that Goldman Sachs has left behind its Marcus fiasco, its push into consumer banking? Is that chapter officially closed?
That chapter is closed. Keep in mind that they are still focusing on gathering deposits, right? So what they've closed is, saying we're going to expand into all these businesses, incrementally add to something that they've never had a leadership position in, and sort of making an entry in a new market, changing the business model, if you will. Instead, they said they're going to go back to, focusing on what they're good at. They do have the transaction banking business, which is something that they've entered into recent years, but we think that business makes sense for them. I think it helps them to serve their corporate clients. And on the consumer side, stepping away from lending. So they still have a couple of lending products left, but I'm sure everyone has seen the headlines related to Apple and know that those are probably going away too. They're really just sticking to the deposit side of things as sort of diversification of funding.
So talk to us about their asset and wealth management business. I know it's about 30% of their revenue these days. What's their focus for that going forward?
That's a good question, Paul, and really highlights one of the areas of strength this quarter, which is raising money in their alternatives business. This has been a strategy, several years ago, they embarked on shifting from the Goldman that we know for decades and decades of investing their own money, using that expertise to really invest more for clients and making those revenues sort of more of a fee-based revenue, management money for clients versus just the proprietary gains that they would get on those types of assets. And they are doing really well in terms of exceeding their targets for raising money there. And at the end of the day, that's sort of a better proposition to investors in the stock because investors generally tend to like to have more recurring revenue-based businesses and capital-light businesses.
Okay, so tomorrow we get Bank of America, which is currently at a 52-week high, and Morgan Stanley. How are they going to do, knowing what we know from Citi, JP, and Goldman?
Sure. So a couple of different stories. I mean, the read-through is really positive for Morgan Stanley in terms of the institutional business. But certainly they need to jump over that higher bar because according to consensus right now, JP Morgan moving into the number 2 spot for equities trading revenue. Keep in mind that Morgan Stanley was number 1 for several years. Goldman's number 1 now, and JP Morgan moving up. But equities trading should be good. Fees should be good. I think people will be watching on the wealth management side of things just due to some pricing changes that we saw at Wells. So I think that's what people are going to be watching there. Also the compensation ratio to see what's happening across the industry. Bank of America on net interest income. Again, we had sort of that negative surprise from Wells Fargo related to their wealth management business. What are we going to hear from Bank of America with regard to that? We do expect that we'll see the same capital market strength. We're also wondering on the commercial loan side of things, disappointing loan balances hurt Wells Fargo. In the industry data, it looks like there was a little bit of a pickup in commercial balances at the end of the quarter. We don't know if that's just something funky with the data or if there might be more to it. So that's what we'll be looking to hear about from Bank of America.
All right, great stuff. As always, Allison Williams, she's a senior financials, banks, global, all that kind of stuff for Bloomberg Intelligence. She's been doing that for decades, first on the buy side at Morgan Stanley Investment Management, and then for the last close to 15 years with Bloomberg Intelligence. So good numbers coming out of Goldman Sachs. Again, Morgan Stanley and Bank of America tomorrow. Bank of America, I always look for their kind of their loan business or the corporate banking business. What are they doing? What are their corporate customers doing? Are they borrowing money? Are they growing? Are they spending? Are they investing? Those types of things.
We're looking at Morgan Stanley and Bank of America currently sitting at its highest level since 2022 as Goldman Sachs hits a record high. Clearly, the tape is relatively positive in terms of sort of the bull market in the equity market, but nonetheless, financials definitely outperforming. Here's my question, particularly for Bank of America. If we get a steeper curve, which is what many are predicting and how we're trading today, if you get a President Trump, how does that change what they're expecting for their net interest income? Like how much is baked in and how much will change?
Yep, exactly. But some good moves there for the banks. A good move for the market here today. The S&P up 0.7%. The NASDAQ up about 0.8%. And the small cappers up 2.1% in the Russell. How about that? We're going to have more coming up. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
your company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
From Bloomberg World headquarters, I'm Charlie Pelham. Source tells Bloomberg Google parent Alphabet is in talks to acquire cybersecurity startup Wiz Inc. Now, this source says a deal may be worth as much as $23 billion. That would make it the tech giant's largest acquisition to date. Shares of Alphabet up right now on an update for the rest of the market, up by 1.1%. Goldman Sachs trading unit powered a surge in earnings in the second quarter. Both fixed income and equity traders outpaced analyst estimates, while a rebounding capital markets business helped drive better than expected results across much of the company's Wall Street operations. Ken Leon is Director of Equity Research at CFRA.
A year ago, we were talking about David Solomon, in terms of his strategy, consumer, retail. Does this really make sense? And they've cleaned that up, and now they're positioned really to be a leader, as they should be, in the major businesses they serve.
Ken Leon of CFRA. Goldman Sachs shares up 1.2%. Morgan Stanley right now up by 1.4%. Bank of America, which reports tomorrow along with Morgan Stanley, Bank of America up by 1.1%. Also, BlackRock hauled in $51 billion of client cash to its long-term investment funds in the second quarter, pushing the world's largest money manager to a record $10.6 trillion in assets. Cleveland Cliffs has agreed to buy Canadian steelmaker Stelco Holdings for about $2.8 billion in the company's first major move since losing out on its bid for U.S. steel last year. Cleveland Cliff shares up 1.7%, Stelco up by 73%. Those are our top company stories, and this is Bloomberg.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
All right, happy Monday. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in business, economics, and finance through our lens of Bloomberg Intelligence analysts who cover 2,000 companies in 130 industries worldwide. We also keep you up to date on world and national news. And for that, we go to Michael Barr. Michael?
Thank you very much, Alex, Paul, Charlie. The federal judge presiding over the classified documents case against ex-President Donald Trump in Florida has dismissed the prosecution. Today, U.S. District Judge Aileen Cannon sided with defense lawyers who said the special counsel who filed the charges against Trump was illegally appointed by the Justice Department. Trump had been accused of illegally hoarding classified documents at his Mar-a-Lago estate. Bloomberg's Jody Schneider.
This is a big win for the former president. We've seen one conviction in a criminal case in New York. We don't expect the other two, the case in Georgia or the case in on January 6th in the D.C. circuit, to go to trial this year. And this one now is being tossed out.
Bloomberg's Jody Snyder. Judge Cannon's ruling can be appealed and may be overruled by a higher court. Former President Trump tells Fox News that he's going to make his vice president choice public today. It comes on the opening day of the Republican National Convention in Milwaukee. Earlier, Trump and President Biden called for unity after Saturday's attempt on the former president's life. Biden during last night's Oval Office address.
Yesterday's shooting at Donald Trump's rally in Pennsylvania calls on all of us to take a step back.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says 25 Patriot air defense systems are needed to fully defend its airspace and protect the entire country from Russian missile attacks. Bloomberg's Karen Moscow has more.
Along with the Patriot missiles, Zelensky says he also wants Western partners to send more F-16 warplanes than what's already been pledged. Zelensky made the comments in his first news conference since returning from a trip to the United States. He went on to say he's ready to work with Donald Trump if he wins the November election. He added that he's convinced that most Republicans support Ukraine in its war with Russia. Karen Moscow, Bloomberg Radio.
Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Alex, Paul, Charlie.
All right, Michael Barr, thank you very much. So I know it's not a super sexy story, but it's a fun story. And that's Apple hitting yet another record high. But there's like reasons behind it this time. Morgan Stanley saying that Apple is a top pick, saying that the launch of the company's AI platform can trigger a record rush among users to upgrade their smartphones. I should also point out that Loop Capital also upgraded Apple to buy from hold. The same idea that And this is where I think it gets to the use case of AI. Like, Apple has a great funnel to products, to regular people products. And that is where we're going to maybe see the monetization of AI.
I have to upgrade my phone. I'm on an iPhone 11. I'm going to upgrade this September. Why? Not because of AI, but because my battery's dying and the whole Bluetooth thing isn't working so well anymore. So I need to upgrade.
I'm stunned that you still have an iPhone 11. Like, how long have you had this phone?
A long time. It's been great.
And it still works.
Still works. Starting to break down a little bit. But I think the reason Apple's up today is not so much because of our good friends at Morgan Stanley. It's because the news story that Bloomberg had, Apple's India sales surged 33% to record and shift from China. Because for a lot of bulls, they're saying, if China's not going to be this extraordinary growth story that it has been over the past 20 years, what's next? How about India? Where their penetration is very, very low, in large part because they don't have a lower priced phone to appeal to that market. And people like Anurag Rana, Bloomberg Intelligence, say, not to worry. The population's growing. They're getting more and more into the middle class every day. The market, that part of the market's going to grow for Apple.
Now, in China, they have the local smartphone market that has a lot of lower priced phones. Do they have that in India also?
Yes. But in China, they found that the consumers have been historically been very aspirational. And part of where they see that is in some of the brands they embrace. One of those brands has traditionally been Apple.
Oh, interesting. All right. Well, we'll all look for that moment when Paul brings in a new phone.
Yes.
And it'll be a moment, and we'll talk
moment.
about it. That wraps it up for Paul and myself on this Monday. Bloomberg Intelligence, you've been listening to it as stocks hit another record. Apple hit another record. Small caps are up. Next is Balance of Power with Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons from the RNC convention in Milwaukee.
Live from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, we welcome you to a special Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew. Kaylee, it's day one of the Republican National Convention here in Milwaukee as we anticipate news on a running mate, but also find breaking news today on Donald Trump's legal journey yet again.
Yeah, one of the 4 criminal cases against Donald Trump completely dismissed. It's the documents case down in Florida in which a Trump-appointed judge, Eileen Cannon, has dismissed the case on the grounds that the special counsel who brought the case against the former president, Jack Smith, was appointed unconstitutionally. Now, of course, the Justice Department could potentially appeal that. But what news to get on the first day
Incredible timing.
of the Republican convention, especially given just days before the news flow over the weekend and the attempted assassination of the man who's about to become the official Republican nominee.
It's just one headline after another, Kaylee, and in this case, another win for Donald Trump on the legal front. His sentencing in the New York case having been delayed, of course, until September. His immunity claim before the Supreme Court. And now this. Jack Smith may be out of business.
Yeah, we'll have to see his recourse moving forward. But of course, what we're waiting to see first from Donald Trump is that announcement of his vice president as the RNC gets underway from here in Milwaukee. And with the latest, let's bring in Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall. Tyler, it has been a long time coming to this moment, and now it's here.
Right, Kaylee. Well, the Republican National Convention has largely kicked off as planned here in Milwaukee, and there's a real sense of energy as you walk around the city, as we're expecting nearly 50,000 participants to flock here over the next 4 days. As I mentioned, it's proceeding largely as planned. We're expecting the party to vote on their platform and then also formally nominate former President Trump as the party's nominee. But as this all gets underway, there is this heightened scrutiny on the security in the wake of the assassination attempt over the weekend against the former president. Now, President Biden used this moment, the eve ahead of the Republican National Convention to address the nation from the Oval Office, urging Americans against political violence. Take a listen to what he had to say.
A former president, an American citizen killed while simply exercising his freedom to support the candidate of his choosing. We cannot, we must not go down this road in America. We've traveled before throughout our history. Violence has never been the answer.
Now, Now, the Secret Service says they are largely keeping plans in place that they've been working on for nearly 18 months to keep this convention safe. They did add that they are adding law enforcement personnel around the city. We learned that the Secret Service is working with nearly 40 different law enforcement agencies from all around the country to help keep this convention safe. And as it gets underway and more people come here and there's more intrigue, as you mentioned, one of the things we are watching closely for is who former President Trump is going to announce for his vice presidential nominee. Some of the names going around include Senator J.D. Vance and North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum. So we'll have to see where that shakes out. He does say that he will announce that pick today. And we know as we get this schedule for later in the week, that VP pick will address the nation in prime time on Wednesday before former President Trump takes the stage Thursday night.
Tyler, thank you. Bloomberg's Tyler Kendall with us in Milwaukee on this first day of the RNC. We thank you, Tyler, and we're going to have much more coverage, of course, of the convention as it gets started today with, as Tyler mentioned, the roll call votes, speeches later tonight, and maybe news certainly on a running mate. As soon as we find out a name, we will bring it to you. As we turn now to Bloomberg's June Grasso for our other breaking story that we've been following here today, and that is news about Donald Trump's legal journey with a judge dismissing the criminal case against Donald Trump for mishandling classified information. This brings us to Florida and June. Another surprise here. I think we can call this another win for Donald Trump. What does it mean for the other case that Jack Smith is trying to helm when it comes to January 6th?
Well, it doesn't really mean anything for the other case because that's a D.C. federal court, and this is a federal judge in Florida. So the D.C. case will go forward. And in point of fact, Judge Cannon stands alone because from the Watergate era, we've had special counsels. And, for example, Robert Mueller's appointment as special counsel was challenged in D.C., and a D.C. federal judge appointed by Donald Trump threw out that challenge. David Weiss, who is prosecuting Hunter Biden as special counsel, his appointment was challenged on the same grounds, and that too was thrown out by a Delaware judge. So she stands on not solid ground, and I think she was moved to do this and encouraged even more by Clarence Thomas's concurrence, solo concurrence in the presidential immunity case. So this is likely going to go out on appeal and will probably be reversed.
Well, June, just knowing the timeline with which we're working and an election coming up in less than 4 months, how long exactly is that process likely to take?
I think, we've always known that this case was being slow-walked by the judge and unlikely to be heard before the election. And now that we have this new additional element of going to the 11th Circuit, having briefing, they'll probably schedule oral arguments. I mean, it's just makes it completely unlikely that this case, even if the 11th Circuit decides to, what we expect, they say that Judge Cannon was wrong and perhaps even takes her off the case, still it would take too long for another judge to get up to date and to have all the motions that need to be heard in this case yet, which Judge Cannon has been slow walking. So I think there's no chance that this will go before the election.
All right, Bloomberg's June Grasso, host of Bloomberg Law, thank you so much. Now, joining us live on set here in Milwaukee is a member of the House Judiciary Committee to help us react to this news and get things underway here in Wisconsin as the convention kicks off. Republican Congresswoman Victoria Spartz of Indiana is with us now. Welcome to Bloomberg TV and Radio, Congresswoman. Thank you so much for being here. We have a lot to discuss in terms of the convention taking place over the next 4 days, but could we first get your reaction to the dismissal of Donald Trump's case down in Florida?
Well, at least we have some common sense judges, because unfortunately our judicial system been weaponized, and it's really an American people see it. So I think this is very, fortunate that we now can at least have real conversation, and what they're doing to President Trump is unbelievable. We, as a member of Judiciary Committee, we have so many investigations looking on these issues and how what Department of Justice is doing. This is really dangerous what's happening in our country. This is not in the democratic constitutional republic that should be happening. That's happening in third world countries, but not in America. So I'm glad to see that happening, and I think it's a good step forward.
Do you not believe the independent counsel is independent?
Well, listen, we had these independent counsels, but we've seen that what is happening, including with all of this report, they still come from the same system. And honestly, in a lot of ways, even special counsels the Department of Justice appoints, they still, I would argue, probably in some way unconstitutional and probably not as independent because they still come from the same system, and the system became corrupt, I hate to tell you, and really not serving to protect people's rights and using very, very effectively politically.
So would this discredit, say, Special Counsel Weiss, who brought the charges against Hunter Biden, or Special Counsel Hur, who authored that report about Joe Biden's own handling of classified documents and called him a well-meaning man with a poor memory?
Well, listen, I would say that we need to really have a serious conversation about usage of special counsel. In last judicial hearing, we actual Republicans brought up, some of my colleagues too, including me, the issue, how constitutional